any second now. Like I said, we might have a few bumps in the road the way my internet's acting tonight. It may not let us go live. There it is. We're live. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Dean Gleason Charles Sr. of the Seaway Valley Bigfoot Project. He's my guest and co-host tonight. If anybody wants to chime in and let us know comments are working, I want to hop over to YouTube real quick and mute it so I don't have surround sound. If you want to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Okay, well, hi, everybody. I'm Dean Gleason. I'm the Executive Director of Seaway Valley Bigfoot Research. I'm in northern New York, near the Canadian border. Been doing research up here for quite a number of years. I've been guest speaker at several conventions over the years, including Shore Leave Convention in Baltimore, Maryland. I've also been at the Canton Comic Con has had me there to speak. I've done several different shows like this one. I was one of the finalists for the Discovery Channel Extreme Bigfooting program that they were going to do that never got off the ground. So I've been very involved in Bigfoot research for quite a long time.
All right. Audio's a little garbled, but I made out most of it about the shows on Discovery Channel. You've been in it for a long time.
Yep. Still having no problem with
definitely been doing it longer than me then. I've never come anywhere near TV.
Yeah, well, that
still
didn't
having a
get off
problem on
the
your
ground.
end too.
The show never got off the ground, but I was, from what I was told, I was going to be on it, but it never got out of post or pre-production stage of it. And then they decided not to do it they never told us why, but they contacted us and decided that the show was not going to happen. I think they ran into some production problems and they just decided to go another direction with it. But no, I've been, like I said, up in this area for a long time. Had several Bigfoot encounters. Found a lot of tracks over the years. I've heard wood knocking. I've heard calls, whoops, aggressive howls. So I definitely know the area that we've been working is at least got a family, because I did have a kind of a close encounter with a juvenile Bigfoot a few years back. So I know that got to be at least 3 in there, because there's got to be a mom and a dad if there's a young one in there. So, but I've been all over this part of the state, following up on sightings and eyewitness accounts, and down at as far as Bath, New York, which is in the Finger Lakes region. I've been down there squatching and also doing some follow-ups with the eyewitnesses down there. And I just been having a great time doing this. It's a lot of fun to get you out in the woods, meet a lot of really nice people. And a lot of these people just want to be believed. They saw a Bigfoot, or they know that there's a Bigfoot there, and their neighbors or their friends think they're nuts. And I think a lot of times they just happy that somebody to listen to them and believe them. And I mean, I don't believe everybody that tells me they saw a Bigfoot. You usually can tell within the first few minutes of talking to them whether they really did see one or not. You pick up on that pretty quick. But I don't think I've had too many people try to fool me. I think most people really truly believe that they saw one or had an experience. My first experience with a Bigfoot was when I was in high school. My grandfather was a great outdoorsman. He taught me how to hunt, how to trap, how to fish. You could drop me pretty much anywhere in the wilderness and I probably could survive, just from the things that he taught me growing up. And back before fur became a no-no, we used to trap muskrats for the fur pelts. And my grandfather eventually got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore, so he kind of turned it over to me to do. And there was this one section of the swamp that we worked at. He would never put traps in, and I never knew why. He wouldn't tell me. Until this day, I don't know for sure, but I think my grandfather might have seen something in there. That's why he didn't want to go down in there. But after I started doing it on my own, I started going down into that part of the swamp. And one day when I was out checking the trap line, I noticed that there was something in one of the traps that was still alive, which was not common because we used the humane traps, instant kill traps. So if a muskrat got in it, they just killed them right away. They didn't suffer. So I got down there to check the trap out, and I discovered that I had caught a great big huge snapping turtle by one of its flippers. And I don't know if you know anything about snapping turtles or not, but they're one of the meanest, nastiest animals that exist. They'll take your fingers right off in its heartbeat. They're fast for a turtle, and they're vicious. And so I'm looking at this turtle. I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get him out of there without getting hurt? So I finally decided I'd put a boat oar between his head and his back leg, and then I could reach over and maybe get the trap off without him turning on me. So I did. I got him loose, and he kind of snarled at me and went on his way. So I went to reset the trap, and I looked over in the swamp next to where the trap was, and there, coming out from the shore, were a set of Squatch tracks. I mean, the typical, 14, 15-inch long tracks coming out of from up to where the trap was. So I reset the trap, and I was fascinated by looking at these tracks, but I noticed that they only came one way. They didn't go back shore. They came out to where the trap was and then went into the creek. So I pulled my boat over on the other side and looked, and I found where the Squatch came up on the other side. You could see where he dragged himself up out of the mud and went out to the other side of the creek. So I got thinking about it, and I'm thinking that probably what happened is the Squatch saw that there was something thrashing around there in the swamp and thought maybe it'd be an easy meal. A fish had gotten stuck up in there or something like that. But then when he got there and saw it was a snapping turtle, he had the same idea I had. He didn't want to lose a finger trying to get that turtle. So he just left it there and went on his way. And that's what I really think happened. And I didn't tell anybody about that for years and years and years. I never said a word about, finding those tracks to anyone because I had the typical fear somebody was going to say I was nuts, or I made the story up, which I didn't. It was right there in front of me. So years went by, and I would hear I do a lot of deer hunting, and I'd hear the occasional thing in the woods, but I never made the connection that there could be Squatches in the area until one day my brother had told me that he had seen a moose a day or two before that. And moose aren't common where I live. We're on the northern part of the Adirondack Mountains, where Seaway Valley is basically what a lot of people refer to it as, because the St. Lawrence River runs right down between the border of Canada and the United States. So you could call us the northern end of the Adirondack mountain chain. Well, anyway, the moose kind of hang down towards the mountains more. So occasionally one or two will wander up by us, but it doesn't happen very often. So when my brother told me that he had seen a moose, I kind of was excited. So I went deer hunting that day, and I was out there most of the day. And it was just getting towards dusk, and I was deciding to pack it in. And my stepfather raises beef cows. So he was just bringing the feed over to the beef cows, and they were getting all excited and making all kinds of noise. And right directly in front of me in the brush, I heard this sound, and it sounded like an extremely large man that was frustrated, like like that kind of sound. Well, I had never really seen a moose in the woods, so I didn't know what kind of noise they actually make. So I thought, oh, that must be a moose over there. So I'm watching that spot, and the brush is moving, and all of a sudden this head sticks up out of the brush and looks around. And it was a big male Squatch. And he stood up, and I could see him from basically the chest up, and he's looking around like he was looking for something, and then he just turned his back and walked away. And I sat there mesmerized, like, holy cow, did I really just see what I think I saw? And since then, I've seen another big one. I don't know whether it was a male or female. I saw one from probably 500 yards away, and I've seen the young one twice. Once very close. I was about 40 feet from it, so there was no mistaking what it was. It was a baby squatch, and then I saw him again from quite a distance away. He was sitting in the long grass, playing peekaboo with me, sticking his head up out of the grass and staring at me. Then he'd go back down into the grass and he'd stick his head back up and look at me again. But the day I saw him close up, I again was deer hunting, and we have two seasons up here. I don't know how they work deer season down where you live, but they have what they call a black powder season or a muzzleloader season, which is a week at the beginning of the season, and then they go into the rifle season, which lasts longer than the muzzleloader season does. But it was during muzzleloading season, and I had taken a shot at a buck. I figured probably was. I think it's probably kind of standard all over the place. But anyway, I took a shot at a buck. I thought I'd hit him, but I wasn't sure. He took off running. So I reloaded my rifle and I went looking for him. I tried to find a blood trail. Couldn't find anything. So I made a big loop and came back up around like back where I went in, because a lot of times if a deer is hurt, they'll circle and come back to the spot where they started from for some reason. So I thought if I came back around, he might be back out in the field. So I took my time and I walked quite a ways out of my way to get back to where I was. And the last probably 1,000 feet before I went back into the hardwoods, there's a great big huge flat rock. So I walked across that rock and it was all covered with moss and stuff. So I wasn't making hardly any noise. Excuse me. And I stepped back up into the hardwood, and I probably taken maybe 10, 15 steps when I noticed something to my left. And I thought at first it was a stump or a piece of fallen wood or something. And so I didn't pay much attention, and I walked a little ways further, and I thought to myself, I don't remember that being there. So I stopped and looked over again, and I thought what it was I thought it was a hunter in a ghillie suit sitting on the ground. And I own part of the land back there, and my brother-in-law owns the other part. So we don't let other people in there to hunt. We keep it family. So there's a guy that lives down the road that several times I've had to ask him to leave. So I thought it was him. And he was all hunched over like this, trying to make himself small. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's that guy. He's hoping I don't notice him. So I kind of took a little bit of a zigzag path and kept getting closer and closer and closer to him without trying to look like I was. I was looking up in the air, looking around everywhere but at him. So I got about 40, maybe 50 feet away from him, and I stopped and I turned around and I looked at him and I said, "Hey, buddy, what's up?" And as soon as I said that, he stood up. And then I realized it wasn't a person, and it wasn't a ghillie suit, it was hair. And he just looked at me for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. Didn't seem like he was afraid or upset or nothing. And then he just turned and walked off into the brush like nothing happened, like I just passed him on the street. So it took me 2 or 3 minutes to swallow my heart back down into my chest after I realized what I had just done. And I stood there for a few minutes. I said to myself, wow, you just said, what's up to a Bigfoot? And like I said, it took me a little while to get my heart back in where it was supposed to be. That was the closest I ever was to one. But I've heard, I know that a few other times I've been within less than 100 yards of one, just by the noises they were making and how close it sounded. The time I heard the aggressive howl, I think I was right on top of one. But I never did see him that night. I just heard him, and it was pretty scary. I don't know if you've ever heard him do an aggressive howl, but it makes every hair on your body stand up and right straight up when they do it. And when you hear that sound, there's no doubt in your mind what you're hearing. You know, it's not a coyote, it's not a bear, it's not a mountain lion, it's nothing else. It's a squatch. You can tell the difference.
Yeah. I always get amused when people say, "Oh, that's just a coyote, or that's a fox, or a deer." I've lived in a rural area for the entire 44 years of my life. I know what those animals sound like.
Mm-hmm. I think we keep losing you there. Um, I just see me on the screen, so I guess I'm the only one here. Um, I'll tell you the real quick story about when I heard the aggressive howl. Since I guess we lost. Oh, I guess he's coming back.
Yeah, my internet's fighting me too tonight.
I usually have that
I was
problem.
going to say, like
Tonight.
yourself, I recognize those animals and the sounds they make. And like you said, you know the difference when you hear it. For
Yeah.
somebody that's never heard it, it's hard to understand why we can say with all certainty that's not a coyote, that's not a fox. But
Mm-hmm.
like you said, when you hear it, you'll know what you're hearing.
Oh
Where if
yeah.
you don't know what you're hearing, you know what it's not.
That thing let out that howl. Like I said, it felt like the air was vibrating almost. It was just a really weird sensation when the noise hit you. I've never experienced anything like it before or since that night. That's the only time I've ever heard it was that night. And I think it was upset because there was 3 doe out in the field. I was up in a tree stand at the time when it happened, and they were heading that way. And I don't know what spooked them, but all of a sudden something spooked them, and they ran away. And then he did that aggressive howl. I don't know whether he thought it was I that scared him away, which I don't think it was me because they were downwind from me. I don't think they smelled me, and I was up high enough in the tree that they wouldn't have seen me. But I don't know if you're a Happy Days fan or not, but there's an old episode of Happy Days where Fonzie goes camping and he's laying there in his sleeping bag, and all the animals are making noise. The raccoons are chirping, and the frogs are croaking, and everything is making all this noise, and Fonzie can't sleep. So he sets up in his sleeping bag and he just goes, "Cool it!" And all the animals get quiet. Well, when this happened with the Squatch, the first time he did the aggressive howl, I think every coyote for 20 miles started howling. And then he did it again. And the second time he did it, you could have heard a pin drop. Everything, it was like somebody turned the volume off. Everything just got dead quiet when he did it the second time. So I thought to myself, well, I guess there's no doubt who's boss of the woods around here.
Oh yeah, that's real similar. I've got a friend here locally. He's a big time deer hunter, and he shed hunts. He hunts squirrel. He hunts anything that's legal to hunt,
Mm-hmm.
but he shed hunts. And he said one afternoon, right around dusk, right before dark, he was out in the woods. He said, "I heard this roaring howl." Is how he described it. He said, "I've never heard nothing before like it. Never heard anything else like it since." And talked about how everything goes silent. He said it was like even the wind stopped. It was that
Yep.
quiet.
Yes.
He said
Yep.
the same exact words you did. You could hear a pin drop.
Yep. And anybody that's in the woods knows there's always noise. When
Now
you're in
he
the
said,
woods, there's always noise.
"Yeah,
But this was just pure silence. But he's never done
that
that to me
was our
since.
first comment."
Hello.
Uh, just somebody on Facebook at Clutch saying, "Hey guys, at
Yeah,
least
I
we know
see.
somebody's watching."
Yeah.
We've had one viewer watch from the get go. How's it going there at Clutch? As far as vocals, have you ever heard any of the whistles?
Yes, I have. Yeah. And I've heard the whoops too. Whoop, that sound. I've heard that.
Yeah. I was just wondering because I posted the pictures of that print I found when I got whistled at the other day, me and my
Mm-hmm.
dog. And
I've
like I
never.
told people, that was not, you just had to hear it to understand that was not a bird. Birds don't whistle
Yep.
that loud and that long.
I think I've heard them do the owl mimic too. I think because I've heard owls before, but their mimic
I've
is
heard
different.
that.
Still sounds like an
Yeah.
owl, but it doesn't sound like an owl. If you understand what I'm saying, it's got a little different tone to it than what an owl does. But
Well,
I
it's got,
think I think I've heard it.
probably kind of like what I call the 60-pound dove here. We've got what's called a mourning dove. I don't know if y'all have them up there or
Yep,
not.
we got them.
They're solid white, about twice the size of a regular dove, and they've got a real deep coo to them.
Mm-hmm.
But every now and then I hear a mourning dove. The reason I call it the 60-pound dove, I said, if that's a mourning dove, it weighs 60 pounds and it's riding in my back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that loud, that deep. I'm hearing, whoa, whoa. I was like, sit there, like, I've nicknamed one of my local Sasquatches Big Chief. I was like, Big Chief, you're going to have to work on that one because you're trying to do a dove, but buddy, you just don't sound anything like a dove.
I've
And
also
people think I'm crazy, but like
I
I said,
also burn wood, to heat my house.
good.
And so in the fall, I'll always go back and cut some wood. And 2 years ago, it was a year after I saw the young one. I went back and was cutting wood. And every once in a while, I would catch movement out of my corner of my eye, and I would see something moving. And I think that it was that young one back there watching me cut wood. Never saw a good shot of him while I was doing it, but you'd see, you know how it is. You'd see like a streak of brown, and you'd look real quick, and then you didn't see what it was. Well, you're running a chainsaw and stuff like that. It wouldn't have been a deer. It would have had to be something that was, curious enough to hang around. And I had turned the chainsaw off and was throwing wood into the back of my truck, and off not too far away, I heard crash, and I think it pushed over a small tree. I don't know whether it thought it was helping me or what, but one did push a tree over on me one time when I was back there. Not on me, while I was there. So this was the second time we saw the little one. I had another one of my members of my organization. He wanted to go back there on a Saturday. He wanted to go squatching. So I says to him, well, if we're going to go, we got to go in the next couple of weeks because deer season opens up. And I really don't, think it's a good idea to do it during that time. So I'd been taking gifts back to him quite often that summer. So I had some stuff I wanted to gift him. And I always leave it in the same place when I do that. So I took the stuff back and I dropped it off. And he said to me, he goes, geez, he goes, I feel bad. He goes, I didn't bring anything. He goes, wait a minute. He went over to his cooler and he pulled out a beer and he set the beer on the gift and stuff. And I said, well, I don't know how they're going to react to that. And we just kind of laughed. And we did some more scouting around and we came back out we were about 400 or 500 yards away from where the gifting spot is. And there was a little section of grass on the edge of the field that hadn't gotten mowed when they did the hay that year. It had gotten wet towards the end of haying season, and that part of the field sometimes gets a little soggy. And his wife had come with us, but she didn't want to go out in the woods, so she just kind of sat in the truck. And when we came back out to the truck, she was standing outside the truck looking back towards that spot of grass. And she said something just came out of the brush back there and squatted down in that grass. So I had a pair of binoculars in my truck, so I got him out, and sure enough, it was that young one. He was out in the grass, and he was kind of playing peekaboo with us. He was sitting down in the long grass, but then he'd stick his head up and look around, and then he'd stick his head back down. And every once in a while, I noticed he'd turn and look over his shoulder. So I kind of followed his gaze back, and I didn't see one of the big ones that day, but I saw the brush moving back the way he was looking. So I think either mom or dad was back there hanging out just out of sight. So I went back for the next visit to put some more stuff out on the gifting stump, and the beer was gone. Everything that I'd left out was gone, including the beer. And So I thought, well, geez, they did take it. So the season started, and I went over for the first day of hunting season. And when I got to my tree stand, the beer was sitting on the bottom rung of my ladder. So it wasn't open. So I think they brought it back to me. Couldn't figure out what it was, so they brought it back to me and left it there so they knew I'd find it.
Anything's possible.
Yep.
No chance your buddies messing with you took the beer, went out there and got it
No,
and put it on your tree stand.
no, I don't think so because he wouldn't have known how to get back in there without me anyway. And so I don't know. I can't say for sure, but it just seemed kind of weird that we left it on the gifting stump and then it ended up back on my ladder. But I don't think he did
I
it.
wouldn't doubt you. It's just they popped in my head. Some of my buddies, if they knew it was out there, they'd sneak back out there and set it on the tailgate of my truck or something. Be like, Barry, look, Bigfoot, Bigfoot.
I do have a
There's some
story
of
like
them
that.
that, even though I won't say they believe, but they got an open mind and they know I'm into it, they'll give me a hard time about it. They do
There's
something like that. Set them, the can probably be empty, but they set it on the tailgate of my truck. Be like, Barry, Bigfoot brought the can back.
Yeah,
Brought it right up to your truck. Trying to get
I
you a
have
DUI.
I have a buddy that lives up in Thunder Bay. It's in Canada, and he leaves them sunflower seeds. He buys the 50-pound bags of sunflower seeds, and he puts some in a 5-gallon bucket, and he's got a gifting spot he leaves them at. And he was telling me that they were taking his buckets on him. He'd get back there, and the buckets would be gone. And so one day he took a bucket back and left it in the spot, and he said he had just got out of eye shot where he leaves the buckets, and he could hear the handle being picked up on the bucket. So he said he turned around and he yelled, he goes, "Hey, you guys, those buckets are getting expensive. If you want me to keep bringing you sunflowers, you got to leave the buckets." Well, he said that he lives about 4 or 5 miles away from the spot where he leaves the stuff. And he says 3 or 4 days later, he got up and got a cup of coffee. He looked out on his back deck, and there the buckets were. They were all piled on the back deck. And he said, "I don't know how much they understand, but they brought my buckets back."
To think we're completely froze up. I'll try to click on a comment. It says food not a good idea. I'm kind of the same way. I've experimented with gifting, and at first I put food out there.
I've heard it both
I've had
ways.
more luck with whatnots and toys, and
Well, I used to leave them cookies all the time. I haven't been doing it lately, but I used to. I got a friend that works at a grocery store, and they would have cookies that they were going to toss out. Packages of cookies that were out of date or whatever, and they were just going to throw them out. So he would give me those, and I would take them back quite often and leave them out. They were like not the Oreo cookies like the expensive ones, but the store brand of Oreo cookies. I would leave those out there, and they seemed to really like them. I could tell if they took them or something else got into them, because if they took them, they would take the whole thing, the package and everything. If something else got into them, like a raccoon or something like that, there'd always be a mess I'd have to clean up. They just ripped the package open and eat it right there. But the Squatches would take them away with them when they picked them up. But I'd heard other people talk about that you shouldn't do that. So I kind of stopped doing it. But every once in a while, I'll go back and I'll just leave something there. And most of the time, it does disappear. It might take a while, but it does disappear. So I don't think they check it as often as they used to. But my original idea with doing that is I was hoping that they would get used to me doing it, and then maybe I would get a good sighting of one, because during deer season I spent a lot of time in a tree stand, which was within eye shot of where the gifting spot was. So that was kind of my hope when I started doing it. But then I read up on it a little bit. People say no, some
well,
how do you digest what we digest and that kind of thing. So.
I didn't worry so much about them being able to digest it, because a creature that size, I've always said they probably got what I call a buzzard's gut. Everybody joke. I had it when I was younger. Could eat anything that didn't eat me first.
Yep.
But I went more if you feed a stray, it'll keep coming back. If
Mm-hmm.
you stop feeding a stray, it'll get upset with you. I
Well,
don't want an 8 to 10 foot tall, 6 to 1,000 pound Sasquatch upset with me.
no, me neither.
Now you sound like you've had some pretty good luck with your gifting. Mine was hit or miss. I tried, like I said, the food. I tried the classic peanut butter, apples, and Cracker Jacks.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said they loved them for some reason. Never touched them. But I started leaving little whatnots out in the woods, and I got a red hawk feather left laying probably 5 foot from my truck. One feather, just one, laying right in front of my truck. I got a large rock got left laying right in the middle of the driveway out by the end of the driveway where it passes the field before you go back out on the main road. And I'm talking, this rock was, I never can remember if I got my hands in front of the camera or not. This rock was probably that big. I could pick it up with one hand, but to really manipulate it, I would have needed both hands.
Yep.
And it probably weighed 10 pounds. Somebody tried to tell me, well, dogs get a condition called PETA. They'll pick up rocks and stuff and carry them around. I was like, I can't imagine the dog that carried this rock very far.
Yeah.
And with the weirdest thing, somebody tried to tell me try stuffed animals. So I took a dog chew toy. They call them Kongs. They look kind of like a gorilla or a bear or a Bigfoot. You kind of any of the above, whatever you want to say they are. And I took one of the straps off my trail cams and a fishing anchor line for a boat. Used it to strap it to a tree. Put the trail cam about 40 yards away. Well, not 40 yards, about 45, 50 feet, about 25 yards or so away from it, facing the tree that the bear was strapped to. Left it out there for months. Nothing ever come around it, never bothered it. But finally, okay, that ain't going to work either. So I took the camera down and moved it. And I looked over there and them straps had got wet and tightened up, and I'd put them in knots specifically so I knew a raccoon or something like that couldn't untie them. Well, after the elements had got to them, I was like, I'll be out here all day trying to untie that thing. I'm just going to leave it. So I moved the camera, and I don't know, it's 2 or 3 months later. I'm hiking through that part of my property. I get looking around, I was like, that right there is the tree I left that bear on. Gone, straps and all, gone. To this day, I do not know where that bear went. And I thought maybe I'm wrong. It's been a while. Maybe I got the wrong tree. I started circling. I searched a probably 60-yard area around it. I can distinctly remember right here's where I left the camera. So right over there, one of those trees is the one the bear would have been on, facing it. Wasn't there. It was just gone. Like I said, never found a strap, never found a piece of the bear, piece of the strap, anything. I ain't seen it since.
Have you ever read the book Enoch?
And that's been months ago now. I moved the camera back out there hoping maybe they'd come back looking for something else, or nope. And like I said, I had that thing tied to where the raccoons are clever, but they weren't going to untie them knots. Mm-hmm. I had them in sailor knots. And like I said, the weather had got to them and tightened them up and everything. There's no way a raccoon, it would take opposable thumbs to untie them.
There's a book that I enjoyed called Enoch Bigfoot Story. That was supposed to be an account.
I haven't read that one yet.
Oh, it's a good book. I liked it. You read a lot of those books, you go, okay, did somebody make this up or not? But I think maybe some of the stories in there were embellished a little bit, but the underlying current of the book rang true from what I know about Squatches and the experiences I had. And this was supposed to be a story that was told to this Bigfoot researcher about a man who has established a relationship with a group of Bigfoot down in Florida. And he talked about in there that he decided he wanted to get some proof of what he was seeing was true. So he went and put game cams up. And he had, like I said, like a relationship with this group of Bigfoot, this tribe or whatever you wanted to call them that lived in that area. I mean, they were really letting him be one of them. He was wandering around with them, eating with him, and one would come into camp almost every night and hang out with him. And he said when he put those game cams up, they all disappeared. Didn't see a one of them. And he kept getting this feeling inside of him. There's eyes, there's eyes, there's eyes. That kept repeating in his mind. So he took the game cams down and he put them in a box, and he had them in the camp, and he no more than got them down and deactivated. Then the one Squatch, the one he had named Enoch, came into camp. And he could tell that Enoch wasn't happy. And so he went over and he said he apologized to him. He said, I'll never do that again. He goes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I won't do it again. And then after that, he said everything went right back to normal. They started coming around and hanging out with him and showing him things and being his friend again. I really enjoyed the book. Whether the stories in there are true or not, I can't tell you, but it was a good read. And I picked up some things in there that I know to be true, that were included in the story, that I don't think that somebody that didn't have, at least some knowledge of Bigfoot would have been able to make up, and it was a good read. I can't attest to the validity of it, but it was a good read.
It's one that's been on my radar. I haven't picked it up yet. Christmas rolled around. My family gave me some gift cards. I've got one that I'm reading now, one that I just finished. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Sasquatch related novels, Bigfoot. And it's everything. They're all nonfiction. It's everything from Bigfoot and UFOs in the Bible. Got a couple of David Pilates books. So I've got my reading material fixed kind of. It'll take me at least 2 or 3 months to get through what I got before I bother to get anything else. I mean, what's the use of having 20 books sitting on the shelf if you ain't reading them?
I have the same problem.
Yeah, that book's been on my, of course, being a Christian religious, the name Enoch, from the Bible. That's what caught my attention about us.
Yep.
That's a strange name to pick for a book
he
about
said
Bigfoot.
He named it Enoch.
And I've read enough about them.
Well, he said he named him Enoch because he makes a noise that sounds like he's saying Enoch. Whether it's a word in the Sasquatch language or what, he doesn't know. But he'll say that. He'll say something that sounds like Enoch to him. So that's why he named him Enoch. He started calling him that. Maybe it's his name. I don't know. Maybe that's his Sasquatch name is Enoch. I don't know. But that's what he just started just calling that. And, the one main male that he sees all the time that he's most friendly with. So that's where he came up with the name. When I first heard about the book and I typed on Amazon to see about it, I kept getting the biblical Enoch kept coming up. And I was like, no. So then I
of Enoch,
yeah. I wrote Bigfoot. I wrote Enoch Bigfoot. Then it came up. It came up Enoch, a Bigfoot story. And I go, oh, that's the one. And then I got it. But yeah, that's why he named him that. That's why he he described in the book. So
that's another one's on my reading list, the Book of Enoch, and I'm kind of leery about it because I've had friends in the church tell me you don't want to read it. It'll make you question the Bible, the Word of God. Mm-hmm. As a Christian, you don't want to read it.
Right.
On the other hand, I hear Bigfoot researchers, the community, it's all in there. You got to read it.
Yeah,
so I go back
to the ancient alien programs that you talk about the Book of Enoch quite often. And, I know that Enoch was a real person. He was Noah's grandfather, I think. I can't remember now. But anyways, he was in that era.
Sounds right.
I think he was Noah's grandfather, if I'm not mistaken. But, and he was one of the few people in the Bible that didn't die. It said he walked with God and God took him. And, so then if you get into Revelation, some people think he's coming back. He's going to be one of the 2 witnesses in Revelation. I've heard that too, bannered about. Yeah, I've not read it for the same kind of reasons you're talking about, but I would like to read it someday. One of these days, I'll get around to it probably. Maybe after the pandemic's over with and I'm a little more free with my time, I can get into it. I'm having kind of the opposite problem people are having. A lot of people got a lot of time on their hands right now because of the pandemic. I'm the opposite way because of my job. I'm busy right now. You know, I'm putting in close to 60 hours a week on a slow week because I'm a home health aide. That's what I do for a living.
Wow.
And so I'm taking care of shut-ins and
Well, I can imagine. And yeah.
so um,
Well, the
when I
reason I'm off work right now, took a leave. My mother's high risk health wise. She's 70 years old and got COPD. So
Mhm. It was
chances are I could go out and get this virus and be fine in a couple weeks. But if I
mhm.
bring it into her, she probably wouldn't be fine.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's why I
We've been
took off from work. And I'm waiting. I'm not real high on the vaccine to-do list. There's a lot of people ahead of me. I'm waiting patiently, but
I had to get it.
I'm the
I
opposite.
really
I've
wasn't
got
given a choice.
the reason I started this podcast. I've got time on my hands.
Yeah, my
Like what I said, with my mother, I'm not going to take chances.
my boss didn't tell us we had to get it, but it was strongly urged that we do. So I went and got the first shot. I'm due for my second one, and on the first, I got to go back and get the second shot. But I had no ill effects of it. Little sore spot where the needle went in, but that's typical of any vaccination or shot you get. You know, it's going to be sore for a day or two.
Yeah.
But that was the only side effect I had, and it wasn't that bad. You know, I wouldn't even have noticed it if I hadn't had an itch on my arm and I reached up to scratch it. I'm like, oh, that's that's a little sore right there. But that was really the only problem I had with it. Somebody said the
Tender, yeah.
shot's worse, but I don't know. I don't think it'll be that bad. But we got to do what we got to do.
Well, like I said, I'm far enough down the list. I'll probably get a chance to see how it affects plenty of other people before I ever get a chance to take. They'll have their second shot before I get my first one. But if
Well,
I end up getting it,
one thing that was good because of the pandemic, I used to go to Baltimore to a convention, and well, I go to two of them. I go to one in February, and I go down to one in July, and I'll speak at the convention about Bigfoot and Bigfoot related things, and then I also get to enjoy myself at the convention for the rest of it that's there. And this year they canceled the one in July because of the pandemic. So when I was at the one in February, I had a family that was there came to me and said that they've been having Bigfoot sightings and experiences in their area, and wanted to know if when I had some time would I come down and do an investigation. And because of the one in July being canceled, I'd already had the time off from work. I ended up going down there and spending several days down there, and we had really good results while we were there. We didn't have any sightings, but we had knocks. We had a couple. We were getting whoops back to us when we were doing whoops, and they were returning the whoops to us. And it was funny. There's a like a what do I want to call it? Like a bed and breakfast hobby farm on the edge of 2,000 acres of state land, and they were the people that invited me to come down. And so we went out and did an investigation just as it was getting dark, and we were out for a couple hours, and we were getting some good results down by a swamp. We gotten some whoops, and I at least one tree knock. And I said to the young man that was with me, that was from the area, I said, "Boy, I wish we could get back up that way further." I says, "Around the other side of the swamp." And he says, "Oh, we can." He says, "There's a service road down the road a few miles, and we can get right in there." And I was like, "Oh, great." I says, "I'd love to go back there." So he says, "Well, let's go up to the house." He says, "And we'll get the truck and we'll go back." So there was a young lady that lived on the farm, and if I think I sent you the video of the eyewitness doing the recreation of what she saw, it was that young lady. She was back up at the our farm when I got there, and she wanted to go in the worst way. And her mom was kind of hesitant to let her go. So finally she said, "Well, what if I do everything Dean tells me to do? I'll go and I'll stay right with Dean, and I won't do anything unless he says it's okay." And you got to understand, I'd never met these people until the day before. So that was kind of putting a lot of trust in me, I felt. So her mother said, "Okay." She goes, "But don't you leave Dean's side." So we went up to the other side there where the guy had told us we could go, and there was a little pond there. So I walk down to the pond and I go, well, this would be a good place to do a couple of whoops because it'll carry across the water real good. So I did a couple of whoops and there was no response. So I decided to do an aggressive howl. So I did my best aggressive howl, and I got a tree knock and not a howl back, but like a grunt from across the other side of the pond. So I says to the young man that was with me, the one that took me back there, I says, why don't you go up to the top of the hill? And I always carry a squatching club with me. It's a little wooden club because, you know, you don't want to have to look around on the ground to try to find a stick or something when you're out there. So I carry this little club with me and it works great. So I gave him the club and I said, why don't you go up to the top of the hill and do a couple tree knocks and I'll stay here and maybe we'll get, you know, some more action. So the young lady says, what do you want me to do? So, you know, I'm a dad and a grandfather. So I was thinking to myself, well, maybe it's not such a good idea that I'm down here by myself with this young lady in the dark. So I says to her, why don't you go with him? So she said, okay. So up the hill, those two went, and I stayed down by the pond. And I heard him do the tree knocks, and I didn't hear anything. And all of a sudden, I started hearing whispering. Those two up on top of the hill, and they were whispering real loud. And I'm thinking, oh, this is what happens when you take amateurs with you. You know, we're supposed to be trying to be quiet, and they're up there whispering so loud enough I can hear them. So all of a sudden, down the hill they come, dead run. Dean, 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 we got an answer. Something knocked back, and it was close. And I said, okay. I says, well, I'll go back up there with you then. So I walked back up there, and I says, where did you think you heard it? And he pointed off in the direction. I said, okay. I says, why don't you go over and do a couple more tree knocks, and we'll just stand here and listen for a while. So he did. And we stood there and we got nothing. So I told him, I said, well, that's how squatching goes. Sometimes it's hot for a few minutes and then it'll just quit. So I waited long enough. I figured, well, we're not going to hear nothing else. They're probably on to us that we're people and they're just being quiet now. So we had to walk quite a little ways to get back to where we had parked. So the young man went ahead of us because he knew the area better than I did. And I'm walking behind him, and the young lady is walking on my left side. And she leans over and she whispers to me, boy, it's really hard to walk here in the dark, isn't it? And she no more said that. And all of a sudden, crack, there was a squatch, and he was right on top of us. And he hit a tree, and he was a stone throw away from us. And it was like Scooby-Doo and Shaggy. She was trying to climb right up on my back. She was grabbing hands full of me and screaming, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I started laughing. And I says, yes, that was a squatch. And I says, and no, he's not going to hurt you. So calm down. I said, if he'd have wanted to hurt us, he would have did it by now. I said, he's just letting you know he's over there and he kind of would appreciate it if we left. I think that's what he's trying to tell us. So I said, I think we're done squatching for tonight. She's like, okay, okay, okay. So we get back to her farmhouse, and her mother says to her, so how did it go? And I just busted out laughing because this girl thinks she's a little tough nut. You know, she's talking about going in the Marine Corps when she graduates high school and all this stuff. So I told the story, and her mom just got laughing so hard. She's like, you're not as tough as you think you are you?
Sounds about like my mom. Something will happen, and I'll come back and tell her what happened while I was out in the woods. She's like, what are you doing back up here? Why are you still out there? Well, I mean, like you said, once it quits, I feel kind of silly standing there talking to myself if they're already gone.
Yeah. And you can usually tell when they're done playing. When they're done playing with you, you usually can tell.
I had one real good experience with tree knocks where I got it on video, which is probably buried in my page now, but I could put it back up. For about 2 or 3 minutes, I'd sit there and knock back, knock, 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 for 2 or 3 minutes, backwards and forwards. Now, of course, some people warn, tree knocks, you don't know, you could be standing there ringing the dinner bell for all you know. Well, I tell them, as many times as I went out by myself without a gun and I made it back, apparently I'm not ringing the dinner bell, or I'd have been dinner by now. I'm like you. If they wanted to, I haven't had a full-on sighting yet, but I've had two occasions where they was probably within 30 or 40 yards of me. And you probably know the way these things can move. 30 or
Oh,
40 yards ain't nothing in the brush. They plow right through it, and I'd never know what hit me. I
hmm
never knew they were there until they both times they did that kind of stuff that you described. That old man, like he's cleared his throat, or just like
yep,
you said, disgusted or aggravated, which he just and took off through the bush away from me.
yep.
Both times, if they'd have wanted me, they'd have had me. That's what I tell mom all the time. I was like, there's been twice if this thing had wanted me, maybe two separate squatches because they were kind of different color, but it was kind of a different time of the year. But I don't, I don't believe they're instinctually aggressive. If they was, you probably wouldn't have near as many witnesses because near as many of us wouldn't make it back to talk about it.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you, one time it was the year that I saw that little one for the first time. I was telling you about before when I was 40 feet from him. It was the end of that deer season. It was actually it was the very end of the deer season. It was the last day. I hadn't seen a buck all year. I'd seen a lot of doe, but I hadn't seen any buck. In our county, they don't even issue doe permits anymore. You got to take a buck. And so, anyways, it was the last day of the season. I'm up in the tree stand, and this deer comes out, and I look, and it was a buck. It was a nice little 6 point. And he come walking up towards my tree stand, so I pulled up and I shot him. Down he went. So I got down to the tree stand and went and looked at him, and I know he was dead. There's no doubt in my mind he was dead. His tongue was hanging out. I had him by the horns looking at him. And so I left him there, and I had to go get my truck, which was parked probably a mile away. So I walked back to my truck, and I took my time. It was starting to get dark anyway. So I knew I was going to be dressing him in the dark. So I took my time, put all my stuff away, drove back to where he was. He was gone. Not a sign of him. And wasn't a drag mark, was nothing. It was just gone. So I got my flashlight out and I started shining it around. And I'm not, at this point, I'm not thinking of Squatch. I'm not one of those people that every little twig I hear break in the woods or things like that, oh, it's a Squatch. I don't think that way. I was thinking, oh, maybe some coyotes grabbed it, dragged it away, because we have a lot of coyotes up in this area. But I didn't see any drag marks. So I'm shining the flashlight around, and there's a drainage ditch that runs down the side of the hayfield between that and the hardwood. And there the deer was. I saw 1 foot sticking up. It was in the drainage ditch. It'd probably been moved 50 or 60 feet away from where I shot it, or maybe in a little bit more than that. So I went over. I'm still not thinking Bigfoot. I'm thinking coyote. 2 or 3 coyotes grabbed it and dragged it. That's what I'm thinking. So I grabbed the deer. I pulled it up out of the ditch into the hayfield, brought my truck over so the headlights were shining on it so I could dress it. So I started dressing the deer, and off into the brush somewhere, I started hearing that same noise again, that I told you about before, like a big man that's frustrated, going, oh, 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 like that. Kept doing it. So I'm thinking to myself, great. I'm caught out here in the open, and all I got is a jackknife. Rifle's all put away. Everything else that I had that I could have killed something with is in my truck. And I don't think I'm going to hurt a Squatch. Jacked it up and dressed it real quick. Pulled the truck over closer, threw the deer in the back of the truck. So I got my big light out of the truck, and I jumped up on the fender, and I shined the light over towards the direction that I thought the noise was coming from. And I didn't see it, but I saw it move. The whole brush and everything just went like exploded, like whoosh, it was gone. And you could hear the footsteps. And if you're in the woods long enough, you can tell something that's bipedal from something that's on all fours. And this was bipedal. It was booking. And like I said, I didn't see it that night, but I heard it. I saw the after effects of it going through the brush. So it was going to take my deer on me. And I've thought about that since then. I talked to a lot of other hunters, and they'll say, geez, I know I shot that deer. I know I hit it, but then I couldn't find it. And I've had it happen to me once or twice where I shot a deer, know darn well I hit it, and then couldn't find it. So I have a theory You can correct me if you think I'm all wet on this, but I have a theory that I think the Squatches, instead of like most animals that'll run away from a shot, I think they go to it for the reason to try to get to the deer before you do. It's one less deer they have to chase down and kill.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can find it before the hunter can find it, they're strong enough, they can throw it over the shoulder and be gone with it. And you're not, all of a sudden, I have blood trailed deer in a good area, snow. You can see the blood. You can see where the right direction the deer was going. And then it's all of a sudden, there's nothing. There's no more blood, and there's no deer. It's just gone. And I've had that happen a couple different occasions.
Well, I can't tell you you're wrong about that theory. I mean, it's entirely possible. They may be intelligent enough to realize that hunters, even if they don't necessarily conveniently kill a deer for them, the hunters could drive the deer right to them. The deer's trying to get away from the hunter, runs right into the Sasquatch.
Yep.
Or vice versa. I listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff, especially Sasquatch Chronicles. Well, you hear about, I had a deer got right underneath my deer stand, right underneath me like it was scared to death or something. Well, what would cause a deer to do that?
I've seen deer do that.
Something it's more afraid of than it is you.
I've seen deer come running right down through, looking over their shoulder.
You might be onto something there about it.
Yep. I had, the same
you
hunter.
very well be onto something with the whole them.
The same guy that I was telling you about with the feeding him the sunflower seeds with the buckets. He said that he had a hunter in his area report to him that he had the deer in the back of the truck already, and he went around to the front of the truck to relieve himself and turned around and saw a Squatch reach right up into the bed of his truck and scoop the deer up and walk away with it. I haven't had this
Squatch, but I know. I was going to say it's not Squatch, but I know there's the famous report of Linda Godfrey, Beast of Bray Road, the dog man.
Yep.
There's the game warden that had a roadkill of a deer or something in the back of his truck.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, in the dog man or whatever the Beast of Bray Road is, this game warden struck and drug this roadkill right out the back of the truck.
Yep.
I mean, and that's another one of my pet peeves about the non-believers. This is a game warden. This is a guy that, if anybody should be able to identify all the different kinds of wildlife out there in his area, a game warden would be the guy.
Yep.
And that leads into my pet peeve. You got witnesses that are either active or former military, former or active law enforcement, doctors, lawyers, government officials. These are people that, day to day we trust them with our life. EMTs, firefighters, teachers, lawyers. We trust them day to day to run our society and to protect our country and our lives. But the second they see a Bigfoot, they're crazy. And if that ain't the most hypocritical, double-edged standard I've ever seen in my life, it just absolutely drives me nuts.
I live right near Fort Drum. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or not. It's where the 10th Mountain Division is stationed. They're the most deployed division in the United States Army. And their base is right up here, not too far from where I live. And I've had several conversations with soldiers from Fort Drum about Bigfoot. And the one time they were telling me, these were Army Rangers that I was talking to. There was a group of them in a restaurant, and I come walking in, and I have I have several. I have Seaway Valley Bigfoot Research sweatshirts that I wear once in a while, and I just happened to have one of them on that day. And I came into the restaurant and got my food, and I sat down, and I saw a couple of them looking over at me, and I didn't know whether they were, going to make fun of me for having that sweatshirt on, because you never know. You get either one or two responses. Either somebody's really interested and wants to talk to you, or they want to make fun of you. That's usually the two responses you get about when you start talking about Bigfoot.
Yeah.
So the one guy says to me, there really is a Seaway Valley Bigfoot Research around here? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm the director. And he said, well, he says, can I tell you my story? And I said, well, certainly. And he said he was doing training with a group of Army Rangers up in the Rockies. And they were playing war games with another group. And basically, they were both out in the woods. It was kind of like a capture the flag kind of thing. They had to sneak up on the other group. And that was, the training they were doing. And they said it was a weekend thing. We spent the whole weekend in the woods. And he said, I was out, he goes, on point doing night watch. And he goes, my thermal scanning with my thermal vision goggles. And he said, I saw some movement. So he goes, I thought maybe it was some scouts from the other group that were trying to sneak up on us. And he goes, I looked, and sure enough, here come three people. He goes, two very tall people and a little bit of a shorter one. And they come walking through there, and they got almost to where I was, and then they made a kind of like a turn and went the other direction. He says, so the next morning, he goes, we went over there and looked, and there were Bigfoot tracks. So apparently there was this family of Bigfoot that were coming through that area, and they were between his group and the other group that were doing this war game. And so he said, we wrote a report up, and we handed it into the commander, and he told us to make sure that report never went any further. He says, you guys didn't see what you told me you saw. I mean, and these are guys, they're trained. They're not going to lie about something like that. Not on an official report.
Well, the same things happens to pilots in the Air Force or commercial airliners. They see a UFO, their superior, higher ups, whatever you want to call them, commanding officers. No, you didn't. You didn't see that.
Well, one of the other Rangers was in this group. He said, oh, you're full of crap. He goes, there's no way that a group of animals could live this, in the United States or anywhere else without people knowing about them. He goes, how could they move around without people seeing them? And he says, have you ever done the Plattsburgh maneuver? He says to the guy. Plattsburgh is another city that's, 3 or 4 hours away from me in the other direction. So Fort Drum and Plattsburgh probably are at least 4 hours apart, maybe even a little bit further than that. And the other ranger, when he said that to him, he says, no, I've never done that. What's that? He says, well, I've done it twice. He goes, what it is, he says, they'll bus us up to Plattsburgh, and they'll drop us off at the Plattsburgh base. I can't remember what it's called now. There's a military, it's not actually a base. It's a kind of a jumping off point in case there's ever trouble on the Canadian side of the border. That's what I was told, because Montreal is right there, and every once in a while things get dicey between Montreal and the rest of or Quebec and the rest of the country. And every once in a while they talk about seceding from the country and things. So anyway, every once in a while they'll send a group up there for training. He says what the Plattsburgh maneuver is, they drop people off in Plattsburgh, and they have to walk back to Fort Drum without being seen. That's the whole goal of the maneuver. And he says every time I've done it, we've never been seen. Because you travel at night. He goes, you hunker down in the woods at night or during the daytime, and as soon as it starts getting dark, off you go again, and you just be careful you don't expose yourselves. Because it can be done. And he says, if we can do it, he says they can do it. He says they're more experienced in the woods than we are, and they're better at hiding than we are. He goes, it can be done. So, I used to have a Jeep Liberty.
Well, another theory I have on every time somebody asks me what's that?
I was just going to tell you another real quick story. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think we have that lag there, so sometimes I'm not sure if you're talking or not.
I was just going to say, there's lots of reports around military bases for some reason. I know here in Kentucky, we got Fort Knox down on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, right close to the Tennessee border. That's more or less the other end of the state for me. But there's a lot of stories. I had a guy send me a picture of a footprint from right outside Fort Knox. Now, on one side of your brain, you're like, of all the places these things would hang out, why in the world would they be around a military base where you got several hundred heavily armed men and women? I'm not being sexist, just several hundred heavily armed individuals, not to mention armed vehicles. Fort Knox has got tanks, but Then I got thinking about it. I was like, what's around Fort Knox? Absolutely nothing. Acres and acres and miles of absolutely nothing except the occasional sign that trespassers will be shot. United States military property.
That's how Fort Drum is too.
So
It's
on the other
miles
side
and
of my
miles
brain,
and
I was like,
miles.
well,
Yep, there's
on the other
miles and
side of my
miles.
brain, I was like, well, if there's any place she was going to hide, be the place to do it. Because nobody's going to come in there looking for you.
Nope.
If they know what's good for them. Between the Sasquatch and the military, you probably ain't coming back out. Yeah, go ahead and tell your other story.
Well, I used to have a Jeep Liberty, and I had, just for the hell of it, I bought a thing that said "Gone Squatchin," and I put it. You know how people have gone fishing? Well, mine said "Gone Squatchin" on the windshield, and I used to get more people come up and talk to me. You know, strangers. I had one guy follow me to a client's house one day because he saw me go by with that on, so he could tell me his story. But the last I traded it in. I don't have it anymore, and I haven't put anything on my new vehicle. I probably should. But one of the last stories I got, I thought was pretty good, and it wasn't far from where I've been having good success and the property that I own. It was probably maybe 10 miles away. This farmer came up to me in a Lowe's parking lot, and usually the stories all start off, "Are you serious?" Well, don't think I'm crazy, and then they'll start telling you their story. Well, he told me that he thought that he had a bear getting into his corn because he was experiencing, corn being knocked over and just something that had gone through the corn. So he figured it's a bear. So him and his buddy went back one day because they wanted to see if it was a bear. So they scouted around. They walked around the edge of the cornfield, and they found the spot where they thought that whatever it was coming in and out of the woods. And his friend was a hunter. He said, "I really don't hunt, but my friend that was with me is a hunter." And he got looking at the tracks, and he goes, "These aren't bear tracks." He goes, "They're big." He goes, "They're big enough to be a bear track." He goes, "But there's no claw marks." He goes, "Bears will leave a claw mark in their print most of the time." He goes, "There's no claw marks in these prints." He's none of them. He says, "They look more." He goes, "Well, I don't want to say it." The guy says, "What's that?" He goes, "They look like a Bigfoot track." And he goes, neither one of them were believers. They didn't believe in Bigfoot. So they were standing there discussing this, and all of a sudden he told me an awful putrid smell hit him. He said, I never smelled anything like it at all. He says, so we're standing there, go, what the hell is that smell? And he goes, then off in the corn, they saw that some of the rows were moving. He says, well, I guess we're going to find out what it is now. So they stood there watching, and all of a sudden, here comes this Squatch walking down through the corn with an armful of it. He'd been picking corn, and he was heading back towards his spot where he was going into the woods. Well, he saw the two of them, and he just turned around and walked back the way he came. So the one that was the hunter says to the farmer, he says, did you just see that? And he goes, yes, I did. He goes, you know what? He goes, I'm thankful that you're fatter than I am because he's going to catch you before he gets me. He goes, and
that's
then
the classic. Don't got to outrun Bigfoot, just got to outrun you.
He says, I think I can get back to the truck before you do. He goes, and that's exactly where I'm heading. But that I had.
I don't know if I can outrun you, but after I kick you in the knee, I know I can outrun you.
Yeah, there was another kid down the road from there too. He kind of had almost the same exact thing happen to him, but they had a silage wagon full of corn silage, and they had it parked up on top of the hill from where their barn was, and they were feeding it to the cows in the field. And he had gone up there to take a couple of bales of hay up there to the calves, and he had them on the back of his four-wheeler. And he got up there, and he shut the four-wheeler off, and he unloaded the bales, and he's standing there, and he's counting the calves, and he's short one. So he goes, I wonder where that other calf is. So he looked over, and he saw something moving over by the silage wagon, and he goes, oh, that dumb calf got between the fence and the silage wagon. He's stuck in there. So he went over there to see if he could get him free, and he walked around the side of the silage wagon, and there was a Squatch standing on the other side of the wagon, picking the corn kernels out of the silage. He had his hand cuffed, and he had quite a bit of corn there. And he said, I yelled and it yelled. It jumped over the fence and ran away. And I ran all the way back to the barn, he said. So we got back to the barn and he said to his dad, he says, Dad, there's a really big monkey up there in the corn silage. And he says, what do you mean there's a big monkey up there? He goes, there's a really big monkey. He says, okay. So he was doing the milking at the time. So he stopped milking and he went up to the house and got the deer rifle. And he started out the door and he says to his son, he goes, where's your four-wheeler? He says, I left it up there. And he says, well, you big dummy. He goes, that monkey's going to be riding your four-wheeler all around the field when we get up there. And he's like, Dad, he goes, I'm not kidding. There really was one. So his dad told me later, he goes, he was a little too panicky and scared to be making anything up at that point. He says, so then I started taking him a little more seriously than I was before. He says, when we got back up there, he goes, it was long gone. He goes, but you could see evidence that he was telling the truth. There was a pile of corn kernels in the spot where he said it was standing. And then they looked around and they found one track in the mud over near where the fence was, where it jumped over the fence and went into the woods. And that poor guy took a lot of grief after that. They were calling him Bigfoot Boy and Monkey Shines and all kinds of stuff for a while after that. And it took me a long time to get him to tell the story. In fact, his grandmother had to get involved because she was one of my clients at the time. So she told him, you can tell Dean, he won't make fun of you.
I'd say that's probably one advantage you've got in your field of work. You deal with a lot of senior citizens, elderly. And I always said my grandfather was half Apache Indian. I called him Pawpaw, and he passed away when I was 10, roughly, about 10 years old. I said, if I knew half of what that man knew about hunting, trapping, fishing, lay of the land, not to mention the Native American lore he knew. And
my grandmother was half Mohawk.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say there were several other elderly gentlemen who lived in my little community right around Keelat. And you can't call it a town, you can't call it a city. It's a group of houses and spread out over a 5-mile area. And that's all Keelat. But there used to be a lot of old coon hunters and farmers and hunters. I said, if I'd have known now, then what I know now, I could have picked their brains. That older generation, I bet they had some tales to tell.
Oh, I tell you, I wish I wrote down half the stuff my grandfather told me.
Yeah.
You know, the things he knew. I'm the same boat you are. He knew a lot of stuff, and he was a much better hunter and trapper and fisherman than I've ever been.
Oh, I'll never be a pale shadow of what my papa was.
No, me neither.
And he was a Christian man. In both regards, I always tell people, if I am ever half the man papa was, I'll be man enough for me. That's the way I look at it. I'll tell him he was the second greatest man right behind Jesus Christ to ever walk on earth. And I'll fight anybody that tries to tell me otherwise.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt about my grandfather, too. He was just a great guy, great sportsman.
And it wasn't just me. Anybody that knew him would tell, maybe not to go to the extent I do, but anybody that knew him tell you the same thing.
My grandfather's only drawback was he had a German temper. And so he didn't take a lot of grief from people. So there was a few people that didn't like him, and I kind of had the same problem too. I have a little bit of a short fuse, but I'm one of those people, if I get upset with you, I'll tell you I'm upset, but then I'm over it. As soon as, if you let me have my say, then I'm ready to go on being buddies, after that. And it takes me a lot to get to that point. But when my quarter German temper gets up, then I can be kind of a pain in the butt.
I've got the temper, but I've got the long fuse. And I always tell people that's okay. There's a short fuse on a firecracker. There's a long fuse on dynamite. So when I finally do go off, you're going to know it. Not to brag or anything.
Hey, I'm so surly. I got told off by an Amish guy the other day. That's kind of an accomplishment.
Yeah. Because my heritage, one reason I don't drink, I got a grandfather that was half Apache. The other side of my family, I've got Scottish and Irish. If I drank, if I ever went in the bottle, I'd never come out of it.
It's like the old saying, you know, God created whiskey to keep the Irish from taking over the world.
No, the world, yeah. And I mean, you talk about tempers, you mix an Apache with an Irish and Scottish. It's a wonder I'm not in prison.
I think that's all Native Americans, because the Mohawks have the reputation of having tempers too. And my grandmother was half Mohawk. And
interestingly enough, as far as the Apache go and Sasquatch, they're one of the few tribes. Most tribes either lived in peace with them or avoided them. From what I understand, what I've read and what I've heard, the Apache actually had a blood feud with these things.
I've heard that too.
For some reason, the Apaches just absolutely kill or be killed on sight. There wasn't no common ground.
Was that there was a female Sasquatch that had been coming into the village and snatching kids, and they don't know exactly why she was doing it. Some people thought maybe she had gone a little nuts, or that she couldn't have kids, and that was her way of trying to, I don't know, have a family. But the thing was, she was too rough with the kids, because the ones she took always turned up being dead. They always turned up getting killed. So finally, the tribe had enough of it. So they went after her, and they ended up killing her. And the rest of the Squatches in the area didn't appreciate that, and there was quite a little war, I guess, between the two of them, from what I heard.
I never heard that.
Yeah.
Because my activity first started around the farm here, you know, and I've been a Bigfoot believer ever since I was little. Dad brought a book home from the library and let me look at the pictures. And I always tell everybody, hook, line, and sinker. And that I wasn't old enough to read the book. I could just look at the pictures. Something about Bigfoot. Well, anyway, when the activity started here a few years ago, and I read and I found that out about the Apache, I was like, well, I hope one of these things ain't looked me up for this blood feud, getting ready to pick up where somebody else left off. I honestly considered, I was like, well, and knowing what I know now, I realized activity was probably going on around here a lot longer than I realized before even as a believer, before I put two and two together in my head to realize what I had going on here. I was like, Papa being half Apache, what if him and this thing's got some kind of grudge against each other? And, you know, it's up here to take its anger out on the next 2 generations removed. I mean, that actually passed through my head to think about it. But so far, it's been live and let live. It ain't been aggressive.
I know a Bigfoot researcher. Well, I don't know him personally, but I've heard him speak several times. He was, I think, you know, he wasn't one that told that story about the female Bigfoot, but he was in the same area where that supposedly happened, and he was doing a lot of research in that area. And he said that he had seen a Bigfoot in that area that had a gray streak down one side of its head. It was mostly black, but it had a gray streak just coming down one side of its head. And he didn't tell anybody about it. And he went to a party, and it was a Halloween party, and the guy that was throwing the party had hired a fortune teller to come and tell people's fortune and things like that as part of the entertainment for the party. And he told me, he said, well, I don't believe in that, so I didn't go over and talk to her. Well, he was getting some food from the buffet table, and this other person come over to him and said, the psychic asked me to come find you. She wants to talk to you. So he went over, and he thought his buddy had put her up to it or something. So he got over there, and she says, you know, I brushed up against you earlier at the party. And she goes, and I got this vision. She says, do you ever go up into the mountains? And he says, yeah. So I go up there quite often. She goes, well, when you were up there, did you see? She goes, geez, I don't know how to describe it. This thing that looked like a big gorilla. And he goes, yeah. And she goes, did it have a white streak of hair on one side of its head? And he, at this point, he's amazed, because he says, I never told anybody about it. And he goes, yeah, I have. And she goes, well, you know that area you were in when you saw it? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, don't go back there. He goes, why not? And he goes, well, he didn't like it that you were there. And he's already decided if you come back there, he's going to kick your butt. And so he said, nope, I decided not to go back there. Oh, we got a visitor behind you.
Yeah, it is. Hang on just a second.
Yep.
That's my mom.
Oh, hi, Mom.
Personally, I don't put a lot of credence into psychics and mediums. I've never
I
had
don't
any
either.
experience with them. And biblically, they're a no. Don't traffic with
Right.
spirits. Don't entertain spirits. Don't.
Yep.
So that's just one
Nope.
more reason for me to stay away from them.
Yep.
And I've always said, if they didn't see 9/11 coming, don't try to tell me you're psychic.
Yep.
But yeah,
No,
I
I
don't
agree with
deny
you. I
other
feel the
people's
same way,
experiences.
Bob.
I know other people that claim to have powers. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just relating the story
But
because I
me
thought it was
personally, I'm just like, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just right. That's my take on that. I mean, for what you related there, I mean, how else would she know it? But
yeah, that was just I thought a really interesting story. Um, but yeah, I
yeah.
agree with you on that.
Oh
I've gone
yeah,
to
very
parties where
interesting.
they had them there, and I didn't get involved with it. I used to do some. I was a youth pastor in my younger days. I we had some bad things happen, not psychics, but some other things where some of the youth got involved in some stuff they shouldn't have gotten involved in, and I really think the one kid, I don't know what exactly you wanted to call it. I think he may have summoned a demon by accident,
Mhm.
and we had a quite a hard time getting that situation under control. So I've always stayed away from that kind of stuff.
That's what I tell people. Just because I don't mess with something, don't mean I don't believe in it. If
Mhm.
anything, probably means exactly the opposite. I believe in it a little too much and don't want no part of it. That's kind of
Yep.
the way I am with spirits. Flesh and blood, Bigfoot, creatures, anything flesh and blood, cryptid. Now, I don't really want nothing to do with Dog Man because I'm half convinced they're demonic as well, if they're real. But
I've always thought that
I'll
they
stick to
probably
cryptids.
were just a different breed of Squatch, or they were misidentified. I don't really know if I believe in dogmen or not. I really think that there's somewhere in the Bigfoot family. Um, they might
I
just look.
consider that as well. Like I said, but on the other hand, like me and another researcher was talking, I've never heard a Dog Man story with a happy ending.
Mhm.
All of them seem to be hostile, aggressive. So,
Well,
like I said, some of them border on supernatural and demonic because apparently some of them, they're bulletproof. Whereas most Sasquatch stories you hear, every now and then you hear one that the Sasquatch was bulletproof, but with dog men, you hear people, I loaded my AR-15 into it and it walked away. Well, that's not a flesh and blood creature.
no, but I think it would take a heck of a bullet to bring down a Squatch. I usually
Oh,
hunt
yeah.
with a 30-06, and I don't know if I could bring one down with it or not. It might. I mean, it's a pretty got quite a lot of kick to it, but first of all, I wouldn't shoot one anyway, unless I had to, unless it was right
Self
on top.
defense, yeah.
It was right on top of me and I had to shoot it, I would. But I was talking to my brother after I saw that young one, and one of his friends kind of walked in the middle of the conversation. And he was trying to get me to tell him where I saw it, and I wouldn't because well, first of all, I don't really like the guy, but he uh, he made the comment, well, if I thought that was true, I'd strap on my 45 and I'd be famous by tomorrow. That's what he said. And I was like, boy, I'm glad you don't know where I was.
Be famous, all right. Being famous in a David Pilates book.
Yeah, but no, I wouldn't raise up on one of them unless I had to. Um,
That's me. Self defense. If it trying to hurt me or mom or my dog,
yeah.
then and
Well,
I
that
actually
day that I heard that aggressive howl that I was talking about earlier, that was a long walk back to my truck that night. Let me tell you that. It was a long walk, and you know, I had the rifle ready because I didn't know if that thing was going to come piling out of that brush right at me or not. The way that sounded, it sounded like it was mad at the world, and it sounded huge. And I think it might have been the big one I saw down on my brother's earlier, a few years before that. I'm guessing it was the male.
Yeah.
But it if it had came out of that brush and it was charging me, I would have shot it. But the thing is, you're probably not going to get off more than one shot, maybe two, if you're lucky. And I don't know
Better
if
make them count.
yeah, I don't know if that 30-06 would stop it or not, but I'm just glad I didn't have to find out that night.
Well, I've heard another podcast host, researcher, which he didn't invent this saying, just like back in the Wild West, the old Westerns with the Indians, save the last bullet for yourself.
Yeah. But like I said, I'm glad I've never had that kind of thing happen. And I think they've gotten used to me now. They know who I am. I'm back there a lot. And then I just built a camp back there this year. And so I'm planning on spending even more time back there when I have the free time, which right now is like, it's almost like Bigfoot. How do you find it? But I think they've gotten to know me a little bit. They know I'm not there to hurt them. I think that's maybe why I've gotten as much activity around me as I have, because my nephews go back there, nothing ever happens, and they make fun of crazy Uncle Dean with his Bigfoot. I was kind of glad this year that I did find that one castable print, because now I have a little bit. I had pictures before of tracks I'd found, but when I went down to Bath this year, I had taken a kit with me, and I'd never tried to cast a print before. So I went and I bought some plaster of Paris, and I had that in there because I said, well, it'll be my luck. I'll drive all the way to Bath and I'll find tracks, or I'll find something really good, and I won't have anything to document it. So I went to the hardware store and bought some of the containers of plaster of Paris, and I took a lot of stuff with me down there, and I didn't use any of it. We found scat and we found other things, but no tracks. So I had come back to my land, and I just bought some new trail cams, and I wanted to put them out. And I wanted to put one over on that flat rock I was telling you about, because it's a very wide open space surrounded by trees and brush. And I've always wondered if the Bigfoot sometimes don't hang out in that spot, because it just seems like it'd be a nice spot to hang out in. So I wanted to get a cam up in that area so I could see that area on the cam. And there's only one little cedar tree growing right in the middle of that big rock. It grew up through a crack in the rock or something. So I was going to put the cam right on that tree. And I got it on, and I got it positioned where I wanted it. And I went around to the back side of the tree to tighten it up. And I looked down, and over in it was dry by that point, but there'd been mud there. And there's where the track was sitting right there. You can see where the toes had pushed the moss up where it had stepped. And I'd never found a track that was like that good that I could cast. And so now crazy Uncle Dean has a little bit of proof that what he's saying is true. But it doesn't seem like they want to hang when my nephews go back there and hunt. They never see anything, or they don't know. They might. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, they don't conceive that it's something like a Bigfoot. They might hear something or whatever and not think about it because they don't believe in Bigfoot or have never seen one. So they're not thinking, oh, well, that must have been a woodpecker pounding in that tree over there, or or that whooping sound must have been some kind of bird or something. I'm wondering if maybe that goes on with those guys. But now that I know the signs and I know
that kind of reminds me. I work with a guy with an avid squirrel hunter. And one day at work, I had my phone with me, and I had some pictures of possible tree breaks and stuff. I've taken him through it, showed him. He said, well, you know what? He said, you've got your eye trained different than my eye. He said, I'd walk right past that and never look at it twice, never think about it. He said, but you see it, and at least you know what it is. So like you're saying, it may take a certain way of thinking, for a better way to put it. I ain't going to say I'm trying to think like a Bigfoot, but you know what I'm trying to get at. It's just the right mindset, or whatever you want to call it.
It's like Bobo says, 9 out of 10
here. Go ahead.
No, it's like the old, Bobo always says, 9 out of 10 scientists agree. If I like it, Bigfoot likes it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I kind of made that comment when I was showing the camp on the video I sent you,
Mhm.
because right on the back side of where the camp is, there's a nice apple tree there,
Mhm.
and I had a cam up on that most of the fall, and I didn't get any Bigfoot, but boy, I got some nice deer pictures, um,
Oh, yeah.
and I got the biggest deer that I ever have gotten in my whole life this season. And I had pictures of him all summer hanging around back there in different spots. So I knew he was in there. And opening day of season, I let a nice 8 point go by me, which normally I would have harvested. But I knew that there was a bigger one because I had seen the pictures of it. And I got lucky in the second day of the season. Um, I had a shot at him, and I was able to harvest him. And he's the biggest deer I've ever shot in my life. He was 9 points. He was almost 10, but he was only 9 I could count, and he was way over 200 pounds. So that's a big deer for up here. And but like I said, I would have shot that 8 point first day of season, but I let him go by. I had a friend with me, and they said, "You're not going to shoot that deer?" I'm like, "No, there's a bigger one. That's a little one. That'll be a middle of the season deer if I don't see anything else." And they kind of laughed. I think they thought I was pulling their leg or something. And then the next day, I got the big one.
Yeah. I was going to say we're right at an hour and a half here. I thought we'd ask each other a few questions. If you had any for me, I had a couple for you before we finish off. If you want to go
I
first, I don't know if you got anything to ask. You
I
want to
can't
ask
think.
me?
I can't think of anything. No, but I'm more than happy to answer anything you'd like to ask me.
The audio was messing up. I have to try it again. It was completely garbled there.
Okay.
I hear you pretty good right now.
All right. Well, like I was saying, I can't think of anything I wanted to ask you at this point in time, but I'll be more than happy to answer anything you'd like to ask or do my best to answer.
All right. A few basic questions I always ask. The big one, what do you think a Sasquatch or Bigfoot is?
I think it's an unidentified great ape of the world. Um, the DNA that they've collected so far says very closely related to us. But being a Christian, I don't believe in evolution, so I'm not going to say they're in the human family tree, but I think they are in the great ape family tree somewhere. That they are closely related to us biologically. Um, I know that they say what a chimpanzee is less than 1% the same DNA as humans have, and Sasquatches are about the same distance from us. Less than 1% DNA wise, from what I understand of the DNA research that they've done. So I would say that they're an unidentified, highly intelligent great ape.
Well, I'm sure you've probably heard my opinion on previous videos or in my group, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have or not.
Yeah, I've seen some of the stuff that you talked
Yeah.
about on there.
As a Christian, I agree. I don't believe in evolution, but I lean more towards the Nephilim and what it says about they committed crimes against man and animal. Part of the reason Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And then there's a creature or a race they call the troglodyte in the Bible. They were quite cave dwellers. If you read them, there ain't a whole lot in there about them, but they really fit the bill. And
Yeah.
like I tell you, I believe they could be some kind of descendant of those.
Yeah, I think they could be. It could even be a cross between the Neanderthals and um, maybe Gigantopithecus or a similar ape maybe that we don't know about. There's still a lot of the fossil record that's incomplete. They're always discovering some new species. Like a couple of years ago, they discovered what they call the hobbits, which were a shorter stature branch of the human family. they don't have to be Gigantopithecus. I could talk really tonight. Anyways, they could be some kind of an offshoot or a hybrid of those animals. I think that they're very, very intelligent, close to human intelligent, maybe even better than us. I don't know, but
I always saying they're as smart as humans doesn't give them enough credit, but
it might be insulting when you say that.
Could be an insult. But
yeah, I mean, there's other animals on the planet that have close to human intelligence. For example, the dolphins. The whales. Their intelligence is close to human.
Yeah.
Just they're in a different environment than we are, so they're considered more primitive than we are. But they probably look at us and think the same thing. Why are they on a dry land? We can have all this water to water.
Well, everybody thinks we're so much more advanced, but if you take away our technology, we slide way down the food chain real quick. There's a lot of animals out there that are a lot better adapted and a lot better equipped to survive than us.
Well, if you ever read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, humans were the third smartest animal on the planet. I think it was white mice, dolphins, and something else. Or white mice, dolphins, then humans, I think it was.
Yeah. Another question, it always goes hand in hand with Bigfoot. Everybody asks me about it, and you've heard me mention him a time or two. David Pilates, the missing 411. What do you think is going on there? I personally don't think Sasquatch are responsible.
I think there could be some truth to it. I've seen people do some stupid things in the woods over the years. Could be that they ticked off a squatch. Squatch is watching them and not appreciating how they're treating the environment, or coming too close to their young. A bear will kill you if you come close to a cub. I think Bigfoot sometimes maybe gets upset and will go after a human because of the disrespect or feeling threatened. They may feel themselves are threatened, or they're young, or their woman is threatened, or something like that, and they'll fight like a human will. So I think a very small percentage of the people that come up missing are Squatch related. I think Squatches more often than not would try to frighten the people away if they really didn't want them in the area. Rock throwing, yelling and screaming at them, doing demonstration charges, which we've all heard stories of them telling.
Oh, yeah.
As far as kids coming up missing, I don't think that Squatches do that. They're more apt to be protective of a human child than they would to be doing it any harm. I mean, I've heard stories about them bringing lost kids back to the camp, when people have been camping. I've heard several stories of that happening, where they'll be, okay, come on, I'm taking you back to where your people are, kind of thing. It was little boys. There was a story I read not too long ago about a little boy talked about he was gone for a week.
North Carolina.
Yep. And he said he spent the time with a bear. Mm-hmm. I think he probably spent the time with a Squatch. Is probably what he did. I could see a bear would eat him.
Yeah.
Really, I don't think a bear would have any compunction whether it was a young one or an old man or a guy in his prime of his life. If they caught you, they'd eat you. And I don't think a bear would have hung onto that kid that long and kept him alive. So I really think that kid spent a week with a Squatch. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but
to be perfectly clear, David Pilates has never blamed the whole 411 thing on Bigfoot. He's never come out and said what he thinks is responsible.
Right.
My thought on it was, and I've said it on here before, I don't see how a 10 foot tall creature weighs somewhere between 600 and 1,000 pounds can run up and snatch me from 50 yards away from you, and you don't hear or see a thing. Don't hear me scream. Don't hear it coming through the brush. Nothing. Like I told somebody one time, I don't think they're Navy SEAL Sasquatch that are running up behind people, snapping the neck, throwing them over their shoulder, not making a sound. I believe there's something to it. Like you said, there's 100 ways to die in the woods that don't involve any kind of cryptid or paranormal or anything weird. But I believe there's something going on because some of those stories, especially involving the kids, where they'll find them 35 miles away, 3,000 feet above elevation wise where they found them, where experienced hikers have trouble getting. How did this kid get up there, you know?
Yeah.
And I've kind of wondered, my second favorite cryptid after Bigfoot is a thunderbird. Now, something that big flying could swoop down and grab somebody. And it's scary to think there's something out there big enough to grab a full grown man. But that would explain why you don't see and you don't hear nothing. Just like that, they snatched it and back up, just like an owl snatching up a mouse.
Yep.
But let's see. I was going to ask you, the two you got a decent look at, the male and the juvenile. Could you describe the sizes a little bit better? How tall? About what you think they weigh? What everybody goes on about the
one I saw. The one I saw the best was the little one, and I'm guessing he was fairly young. He probably was 4.5 feet tall. The first time I saw him, the second time I saw him, he looked like he'd grown quite a bit, but it still looked like the same Bigfoot. He was not a big one. He was still pretty small, unless he had a brother. But no, his hair was kind of, I would kind of like a Wookiee's length of hair, the way it laid on his body, just to give you an example of something everybody can probably understand.
Well, Mom's off here to the side. I don't think she even knows what a Wookiee is, but Chewbacca in Star Wars, the one I like so much, the one I always tell you looks like Bigfoot.
Yeah.
The big one, big hairy one. So still don't think she knows what I'm talking about.
The hair on his body was probably like that. It was kind of a brownish gray color. I was also seeing him in the twilight too, so it was, really hard to judge the color real good. But it had kind of a grayish tinge to it, but it was brown, but with a grayish tinge to it. He looked fairly well groomed. There was only a couple of spots where I could see his hair looked like it was tangled, but other than that, he looked like he was fairly well groomed. There wasn't a lot of hair on his face, and please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not a racist man at all, but the skin tone reminded me of somebody from Africa. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying or not. Person that's African American, their skin is a little bit lighter colored than somebody that's actually came here from Africa. I know quite a few African immigrants.
Yeah.
And their skin is just a different shade. Anyways, that was how the skin looked to me. That's what the first thing that popped in my head when I saw the skin was it looked African, like an African person. And like I say, he didn't have a lot of hair on his face. The eyes were bigger than like a young person's eyes would be that age. They looked like they were a bigger eye, and you could see the big brown part of them pretty good. I was close enough to him; I could see the white and the brown, and the eyes appeared to be brown to me. And he just stared at me for probably was a second, but it seemed like 2 or 3 seconds because I was so focused on him when it happened. When I realized what I was looking at, it was like every sense of my body was just focused on him at that moment. And I mean, it's like etched right into my brain. And I just stared at him, and he stared back at me, and the expression on his face never really changed much. He didn't look like he was upset. He didn't look like he was scared. He just, oh, hi, and turned around and just boogied. And he didn't run. He just walked away at a leisurely pace. There was no hair on the bottoms of his feet. And they were kind of a lighter color than the rest of his skin that I'd seen on his face and his hands. Didn't have a lot of hair on his hands either, just like on the back of the hand, but the rest of it was pretty bare. Long fingernails. But he just boogied into the brush, and just like he was walking by me on the street. But if I had a 7 or 8 foot tall parent not too far away, I don't think I'd have been afraid of me either.
Yeah. My daddy can whip your daddy.
Yeah, my daddy can just pound you. But it was probably week, maybe two later, when the second sighting I had of the adult, and that was quite a ways away. It was a lot further away than the first time I saw one. Had to be a good 500 yards away, but uh, it stepped. There was a in this. I was in the same area where I saw the little one, watching a field, and like I said, it was hunting season, so I was watching a field, and there was a gap in the trees. There had been an old dead tree there, and I had cut it down for firewood, and the the mom or dad stepped out into that clearing and turned and looked right in my direction, and then went back into the back behind the tree. And it did that a couple of times. It looked around. It did the old peekaboo you hear about. Kept looking back like this at me. And I thought about that later, and I thought to myself, I wonder if that was a thank you to me, because I was armed. I was right on top of that baby, calling it a baby for lack of a better word, but I was right on top of that young one, and I could have shot it with the black powder rifle. I wouldn't have missed at that range. And I wondered later if that was kind of a thank you to me for not hurting its kid, or it could have been the opposite. It could have been a warning saying, I'm the big kahuna here, and even though you were that close to my kid, don't do it again, or something like that. So I wondered, it could have went both ways. But my experience since then with them, I kind of thinking that it was the first one, that it was a thank you. Okay, buddy, hats off to you. You were a good guy the other day, because it seemed like the activity picked up after that point, where I was hearing more tree knocks. I was not seeing them other than seeing the little one again later, but they were letting me know they were around. And by giving me a whoop, or doing a tree knock, or just making some kind of noise so that I would know they were there, kind of thing. So I think that they know that I'm there, not going to do them any harm. I'm one of the good little feet. I'm not bothering anybody. And it was right around that time, I think it was the next summer after that, that I decided to do the gifting. And that's when I started doing the gifting back there to them, until I did a little more research into it and heard some other people talk about it, other researchers, other experiencers, and said that they didn't think it was a good idea. So I kind of curtailed it. I do it every once in a while now, but I don't do it as often as I used to.
400 or 500 yards away is probably hard to make out any kind of size or
Yeah,
anything like
I would be, if I told you anything about details from that distance away, I'd be making it up, because
yeah.
I could tell it was a Bigfoot just because of the sheer size of it.
I was going to say 400 or 500 yards. The fact you could see it in the trees,
Yeah,
tells you enough.
yeah, it was big. It wasn't a hunter. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs. It was a Bigfoot, and it like I said, it stood there long enough for me to see what it was, and then it did the peekaboo thing with me for a little bit, and then it left the area. So that was the last time I saw a big one. I saw like I said, me and the other two people from the group, we saw the little one again that day. We went back and did the gifting, and it was in the long grass looking at us. And the one guy that was with us, he's a little less experienced with it than I am. He asked, can we try to get closer? And I told him, no, you don't do that. I mean, all you're going to do is chase it away if you try to do that. And it might not let you see it again. But if you just act cool about it, you let the experience happen as it's happening, without trying to, rush it, or to um, intimidate it at all. Then it's going to say, okay, this was a positive experience. Maybe I'll let him see me again. He didn't do anything to upset me today. So maybe next time he's here, I'll give him a peek around a tree, or I'll give him a whoop, or I'll do a tree knock for him, or maybe I'll throw something at him, just to get his attention. But and it was after that I had the thing with the the thing whooping at me while I was up in the tree stand. Wasn't aggressive. It was just like a little hello, like whoop, whoop, kind of hello, I'm here. And it was around that same time. I think it was it was just before that when it pushed the tree over while I was back cutting wood. And I think again that was it's a little hi, I'm around, you know, kind of thing. So I don't think you should be aggressive. You should charge towards them. You should try to get closer to them if they're there. Just let them do it all. Let them, if they want to come closer, let them come closer. I've often thought about that, what I would do if I was in the woods and I came up on a big one, like I came up on that little one. What would I do? I know what I hope I'll do, but probably I'll be like Scooby-Doo and turn around and beat feet as fast as I can away from it. But I've rehearsed it in my mind several times that I would stand there and just open my hands so that it could see that I didn't have anything that was going to hurt it and have a conversation with it. Hello, I'm Dean. I'm here. I'm your friend. You don't have to worry about me. I will never hurt you. I'll never let anybody else that I possibly get in here to hurt you. That kind of little thing. I'm hoping that's what I'll have the courage to do if I ever have that experience again where I'm there with an adult. Baby just surprised me so much. I really didn't think about it, and I said, "Hi, buddy, what's up?" And I thought I was talking to another person when at that point in time, I didn't realize I was talking to a Squatch. But I'm just hoping that someday in my life I'll have that choice to make, whether I'm going to run like a little girl and scream or I'm going to stand there and try to talk to it.
I guess I'll save it for the last question I asked you before we come on. The strangest thing you've ever encountered, Bigfoot or otherwise, or?
Well, when I was about, I don't know, maybe first, second grade, my mother and I lived with my grandparents. Actually, not too far. The land that I own now is part of the old farm where my grandfather made his living. Kind of got divided up between the grandkids after he passed. Excuse me. Anyway, my grandfather had this little ritual at night. He'd always go out into the dining room, which faced the St. Lawrence River on the house that we lived in, with his flashlight. And he had a thermometer nailed to the outside of the wall out in there. He would look outside to see what the temperature was. And then he would come into the living room and he'd make an announcement. Oh, it's 40 degrees out now, or something like that. And then we had this old moth-eaten dog, mutt that we had there, and he'd yell to the dog, I think there's some marshmallows out in the cupboard. And the dog would get all excited and run out into the kitchen with him, and he'd give the dog a marshmallow. Did that same thing every night. Well, this one particular night, he goes out into the dining room to see what the temperature is. And he didn't come back for quite a while. So finally he comes out and he says, he called my grandmother Georgie. Her name was Georgianne. He always called her Georgie. He says, Georgie, he says, come out here. You got to see this. So we all got up, my mother and I and her, and we went out into the dining room. And there, between our house and the St. Lawrence River, there are two roads. There's Route 12, which at the time hadn't been there very long. I remember when I was a kid, them building it. It hadn't been there very long. And then there's a road they call the Camp Road, because there's camps along that road. And over between those two roads and the river, there was, setting in the sky, your typical science fiction looking flying saucer, just setting there in the sky. And it was close. You could see it had windows in it, and it was just setting there in the sky. So we were looking at it, and my grandfather says to my grandmother, go call the, he always called them the boys. He says, call the boys. They got to see this. So he called them, and they came down. And so we had, let's see, my grandmother, myself, my grandfather, and his two brothers. So there was 5 witnesses. And it sat there for a long time. It sat there so long that the adults in the party all got bored of looking at it, went in the other room to have coffee. And I was the only one that stayed out there and watched it. And I saw it leave. The others didn't. I saw it leave. And it started off slow, and then all of a sudden, it was like the opening of Star Trek. The Enterprise kicks the warp engines in, and it just goes, and it's gone, like a little spot of light. That's exactly what it did. It kicked in its equivalent to warp drive or whatever, and it just went, and then bang, and it was gone. Just a little spot of light, and it was gone. So that's, other than Bigfoot, that's the other strangest thing I've ever seen in my life.
About how big do you think it was? I know being that young, you may not remember a whole lot of detail.
Gee, I don't really know. Let's see. I'm guessing it's probably the better part of a mile from where my grandfather's house used to sit, excuse me, to the edge of the river. And it was in between us and the river. I don't know. I can't guess how high up it was, but it was low enough that you could see that it had a top to it, and it appeared to have windows in it. Like a dome, like, like the saucer of the Enterprise has the saucer section, and then it has a little lump on the top where the bridge sets. Well, it kind of looked like that. It was like the saucer section of the old Enterprise, not the new one, the old Kirk Enterprise.
Yeah.
It was more that shape, and it was your typical flying saucer disc you see in sci-fi movies. Had the dome on the top of it, had a little one on the bottom, and there was at the top and on the bottom you could see that it had windows, because of the, you could see the light coming out the windows of it, and didn't make any noise. There was no noise. We even opened up the windows to see if we could hear the engines running, and it wasn't making any noise at all. And of course, my mother and my grandparents were debating what it is, and they're saying, "Oh, it must be something from Fort Drum, because Fort Drum's 50 miles away from us." The reason why my thing keeps moving, my cat keeps jumping up on the back of this thing here where I got my. But anyway, that's what their speculation was. Oh, it must be some kind of new plane that Fort Drum is experimenting with or whatever. But I can't see where it was anything that we would have had the technology back then to have been able to build. We're talking probably, well, I was born in '63, so this was probably the late '60s. This happened, maybe 69, 70 at the latest, around in that time period somewhere. This happened.
That place it right in one of your big time UFO flaps, or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Right smack in the middle of it when it was at its height.
Yep.
That's interesting. Like I said, I don't get that into UFOs. I find it interesting. I had no idea what they are, if they're real.
Well, it's a big galaxy out there, and
yeah,
it's hard to believe that God would have just created one planet
with life on it. I know there's a verse in the Bible somewhere where, and I'm not one of them people that's got it memorized to the point I can tell you book, chapter, and verse of everything I say, but Jesus says something to the words of the effect, "I go to teach my children on distant shores." And I've always said distant shores could be North America, or they could be Planet X out there somewhere.
He also says somewhere, I have other flocks in other places.
Mm-hmm.
He makes that. I had a really big debate with the pastor of the church that, well, he's not there anymore, but our former pastor, because he used to work for NASA, believe it or not, but he didn't believe in aliens. He thought, no, he said, I believe that this planet is a unique creation. God only created this planet, and I don't think he not just this planet, but the only planet he put sentient life on. And I said, well, I disagree with you. I think if you're saying something like that, you're limiting God. And I says, and I don't see how you can limit God. And then his argument was, well, if he did make other life, then he would have had to go there and die for them too. And I said, well, there's two flaws to that. And he goes, what's that? I go, well, how do you know they fell? They may have not fallen. Just because man did it doesn't mean that the Vulcans did it, or the Klingons did it, or whatever name you want to put on the other aliens that live out there. Maybe they didn't fall from God's grace. Maybe he had a different set of rules for them than he did for us. The other thing is too, is God is everywhere. So God could have done it all at once.
Yeah.
If he had to die for, the squiggly digglies on Epsis Centauri too, he could have done it all at once. The one sacrifice could have been for everyone. It doesn't. He could have atoned for everybody's sins at one time. Through going to the cross, and they're forgiven too.
Yeah. That kind of ties into things I've said in the past, where you've probably heard me say, when God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. Well, he didn't just create the Middle East where the Bible takes place. He created the whole world. North America wasn't a suburb that he added on day 42 or whatever. The whole earth was here on day 6. And I think people forget that sometimes. And I'm just like you. If there are aliens out there, God made them too. Just like Bigfoot. If whatever Bigfoot is, you go back far enough, God made them too.
Yep.
Regardless if they're apes or fallen angels or descendants of either one or something else entirely. There are people think Bigfoot's an alien. Hypothetically, if he's right, if he's Bigfoot and an alien, God still made him.
Well, I've seen,
and that applies to the Loch Ness Monster and everything else.
I've seen a couple of memes where Noah and his wife are standing on the deck of the ark, and his wife says to Noah, she goes, "Did you get a pair of squatches?" And he goes, "Geez, I don't know. I haven't seen them."
Yeah, I've seen that. And another point I always make to people, follow up on what you said about Jesus could have died for them at the same time he did us. I've told Mom this, and she understands what I'm saying. What is time to an eternal being like God? What does a day mean to God? Because there's a part in the Bible that says, your thoughts are not my thoughts, your ways are not my ways.
Right.
I said, what would time mean to an eternal being? I said, maybe
one day in heaven's like 1,000 years.
Yeah, one day in heaven's like 1,000 years. I was like, maybe God just gave us terms like days, months, weeks, years, because it's something we can wrap our head around. Because the human mind really can't, try as you might, you can't really conceive eternity.
Sure.
Or being eternal, being past, present, future at the same time like God is. Time means nothing to God.
Right.
So that ties into the whole, with 7 days, really literally 7 physical days, or to God, 7 days might have been 7 million years.
And also, it never tells you really how long Adam and Eve spent in the garden before they fell.
Yeah.
They could have spent a long time in that garden before they fell.
Yeah.
And people just think, people think as a normal lifespan. Okay. What was a normal lifespan back then?
I've touched on that. Biblical people live 600, 700, 800 years.
Right.
Modern man does well to make it 70 or 80.
Yep. And God doesn't really tell you how old Adam and Eve were. And they could have been around for a very, very long time before the whole fall happened. And just like, the Bible talks about the continents being separated, which is something that modern science didn't really come to grips with until maybe the last few hundred years. At one time, there was a place called Pangea, which was just one big lump of land, and then it split off and became the continents. Mm-hmm. Well, the Bible talks about that. It said in the days of, I can't remember the name of the guy now, but it said in the days of so-and-so, God separated the lands. And it's in Genesis somewhere. I can't remember the exact verse, but it talks about it there. And I saw a real good documentary on Noah's flood, where it talked about that probably part of the flood was actually a tsunami, that God separated the lands further at a high rate, which would create a tsunami. So probably part of the flood was a tsunami, which makes sense. And the geological evidence shows that is a great possibility that happened. So, it just because God didn't choose to put it down in black and white, doesn't mean that it didn't, can't point at it and say, okay, well, the Bible doesn't say that happened. No, it doesn't. God
Well,
probably had better things to tell us.
to that point, there's a part in the New Testament, and I don't remember the verse, but it says about Jesus's works. They were so many that would have filled this book and many, many more, thousands and thousands more books. They couldn't write all his deeds down. We didn't get every miracle that Jesus performed in the New Testament.
Yep.
And I've always tied that back into my belief that at some point Jesus was on North America, because a lot of your North American tribes talk about the Great White Spirit. And the way they describe him, it sounds like they're talking about Jesus.
I got to tell you a funny story about that pastor, the one that worked for NASA. He didn't take jokes very well. And he really came to the wrong church because half of the guys in my church lived to bust somebody else's chops in a friendly way. We all kid around with each other. Most of us have known each other most of our lives. And we had this men fellowship group, and during football season, we would watch the Sunday night game, and somebody would take turns cooking, and then we'd have a devotion at halftime. And we did that for years, and it was always a lot of fun. And then we'd have a Super Bowl party. We'd all throw a couple bucks in each week, and then during the Super Bowl, we'd buy, a whole bunch of pizzas and stuff and wings, and do the same thing. And instead of watching the halftime show, we'd have a devotion, or we'd have a speaker come in and give us some kind of a devotion during halftime. So one of the other things we used to do is we get together and we go to sporting events. We have a couple of minor league teams that are within driving distance of here. So we go and see one of the minor league teams, baseball teams play here. One time we went to Buffalo and saw a Buffalo Bills game. And this one particular time we went to a minor league baseball game, and this pastor from another church came with us, and he didn't know our pastor all that well. He knew him, but he didn't know him real well. So we're all sitting there talking and laughing and joking around. And so somebody said something to our pastor about when he used to work at NASA. And the other pastor says to him, "Oh, Pastor Don, you used to work at NASA?" And he says, "Yeah, before I became a pastor, I worked at NASA." He goes, "Really? What did you do there?" Well, before he could answer, me being the smart, aleck that I am, I said, "Those stickers on the outside of the rockets that say NASA?" I said, "That was his job. He went around and stuck all the stickers on the rocket." And everybody laughed, except him.
I've known a couple guys like that. For some reason, would take that serious, but
he didn't talk to me for 3 months.
I know a couple guys like that. And I'll tell them, I was like, of everything I've said today, you took that serious.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it was me. It was my sense of humor and me joking, and everybody took it as a joke, but him.
Yeah.
And finally, my daughter's father-in-law, he was the caretaker of the church grounds, and a tree fell down in the backyard of the church. So he knows I burn wood. So he says, "Would you like that tree? If you want that tree, you can have it. If you want to come over and cut it up and take it away, you can have the wood." And I said, "Okay, I'll come get it." So my son-in-law went with me, and we cut the wood up and we piled it all in my truck. My son-in-law says, "Dad said when we get done cutting the tree down to come over to the house. He's making spaghetti." So, okay. So I went over to his house and I pulled in the driveway and I look over and there's Pastor Don's car and my wife's car. I didn't know it, but he'd also called my wife and told my wife to come over to eat with us. So I go walking in and we get dinner. We're sitting around eating, and Pastor Don's still sitting there, well, not talking to me, right? So I poke my wife. I go, "Watch this." And I go, "Pastor Don." He didn't say nothing. "Pastor Don." Looks at me and goes, "What?" And I says, I got that tree all cut down that grew up there in the churchyard, right? I says, "And I'm going to burn it this winter in my wood stove to keep my house warm." And he says, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Well, I was just thinking that tree grew up on the church grounds. So every time I put a piece of that wood in my wood stove, I'm going to say, 'Holy smoke.'" And he sat there for a second and you knew he wanted to laugh, but he didn't want me to see him laugh. So he's like this. And then finally he laughed. And then after that, he was fine. Then he started talking to me again.
I've got a kind of oddball sense of humor. Some people say I got a gallows sense of humor, but I understand where you come from. A lot of times people don't get my sense of humor either.
Yeah.
I've been told I got a gallows sense of humor, and somebody said I've got an almost British sense of humor with the real dry, real stoic, like
Oh, I love
one-liner
British
types.
comedy. Love British comedy. Benny Hill.
A funny story about that.
Monty
When
Python.
I was younger, I was a huge Benny Hill fan.
Yep.
I get talked about somebody from my dad got me watching it. It was on Channel 19, like 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night or something.
Yep.
And years later, I'm talking to somebody on the internet about British stuff, what they like, what we like. I was like, well, I'm a huge Benny Hill fan. They's like, you realize that's like the British version of Jerry Springer, right? They's like, British people hate Benny Hill.
I love Benny Hill. I love all those British comedies. Catherine Tate show is hilarious. And
I haven't seen that one.
she used to be, I don't know if you watched Doctor Who or not, but she was on Doctor Who for a season. She
I
played.
watched Dr. Who a bit. Now, Dad got into it. A bunch of my friends. And I know there'll be people ready to burn me at the stake for this, but I'm not a Doctor Who fan. I just never
Oh,
could
I
get
love
into
it. I've met
Like I
several
said,
of the actors.
I know people will be ready to run me out of town on a rail for saying that.
I have a
got into
very,
it.
very nice Gandalf the Wizard costume, Gandalf the Grey. And one of the guys that played on Doctor Who for a couple seasons was in the Hobbit movies. He played Radagast the Brown. I don't know if you've seen the movies or not.
Yeah.
He was Gandalf's friend. He was the brown wizard that lived in the woods. Well, he played Doctor Who for several seasons. His name's Sylvester McCoy. And I had talked to Sylvester several times over the years at different events I'd gone to. So I knew he was going to be at this one event that I was also going to be at. And I decided I was going to wear my Gandalf the Grey costume because I wanted to get my picture taken with him. But this was a Doctor Who convention, so me showing up in a Gandalf costume was kind of odd, So it was the first day of the convention, and I put on my Gandalf costume, and I'm standing down in the lobby talking to people, and they had the autograph table set up on one side, and the actors started coming in and setting up their tables. And Sylvester McCoy comes in, and he's putting his stuff out, and I'm kind of looking over that direction. He keeps on looking at me. He's looking at me. And about the third time I caught him staring at me, I turned around, I went, Radagast. And he's not a very tall man. He's probably maybe 5'1", 5'2". He's kind of short on the short side. Well, he jumps up on his chair, and in this big theatrical voice, he yells across the convention floor, "A Gandalf!" He goes. And he goes, "Come here." So I walked over. He goes, "I want to get a selfie with you," he says, "to put on my Facebook page." And that kind of struck me funny because here I am, just a person at the convention, and he's one of the guests, but he wants a selfie with me. So we take the selfie, and I asked him if I could take one too, and he said, sure. So then he leans over very conspiratorially, and he goes, "Hey, Gandalf." And I go, "What?" He goes, "You got a pipe?" I said, "I've got a pipe. You got a load?" And he just busted out laughing.
Something similar happened to me. Might have been the second CryptoCon I went to here in Kentucky. And I'm having a brain blank right now. The guy that does Beastly Theories from Britain, Andy McGrath, was there. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books, watched his podcast or anything.
I don't know. I don't know a lot about him. I've heard of him.
I walk up to his table and I'm checking it out, and I pick up one of his books, get ready to pay for it, and he sees my T-shirt. Mom standing next to me. Just out of the blue, I was the first person to come to his booth that day.
Oh.
He's like, "Can I have a selfie with you?" And I'm just like, "Sure." So he takes a selfie with me because I'm the first person that spoke to him, I guess, all day, maybe other than other speakers. Nicest guy on earth. He puts it on Facebook and Instagram. About 2 hours later, I'm walking along. I was like, he got a filter with me. I never thought to get a picture with him for me. I had to go back. I got so starstruck that this guy writes books and does a podcast and everything, wanted a picture with me, that I actually had to turn around and go walk back around. "Hey, do you think I could get a picture of you with me?" He's, "Sure." He's like,
Over
"I
the
wondered
years,
what you was going to ask."
Over the years, I probably have met 50 or 60 celebrities from different TV shows like Star Trek, a lot of Star Trek people, Battlestar Galactica people, Doctor Who people. And I have found, for the most part, that they are very, very nice people. The majority of them are. I'll tell you a real quick story. If you ever saw, well, I know you've probably seen the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah.
The guy that played Denethor, the Steward of Gondor, he's been in several other shows too. He was in a show called Sleepy Hollow. He was in one called Fringe, where he played a mad scientist.
Mhm.
Well, this is a nice story. I have a lady friend that lives in Long Island. She's a retired school teacher, and she has a lot of health problems. And she came to the convention, and she rented a power chair so she could get around a little easier. Well, the power chair that the rental agency gave her had a defective speed control, and it was hard to get it set just right. So she's in line to get his autograph, and the line moved. So she went to go ahead, and it lurched on her, and it hit the lady in front of her. And to know this lady, she was devastated. She's just a sweetheart of a woman, and she was just so upset that she thought she hurt this woman by hitting her with the chair. And she was close enough to him that he saw it. Well, he stopped. He stopped giving out autographs. He got up from his chair. He went around to my friend. He put his arm around her, and she was crying. And he says, "Hey, it's okay. Nobody got hurt. She doesn't blame you. Everything's going to be okay. You need to calm down, okay? And just, nobody thinks you did it on purpose." And he says, I don't know what your problem is physically. He says, but would it be okay with you if I prayed for you? And she was just flabbergasted that he asked her that. And she said, yeah. So he stayed there, laid hands on her and prayed for her. And then when he was done, he gave her a hug and a kiss on the cheek and went back around and started signing autographs again. And
that's awesome.
Yep. And just goes to show you, they're just like us. They have a different job where they're in the spotlight, but the majority of those people, I can't say everybody. I've had a few people I've ran into over the years that I didn't care for that were celebrities. But you run into the Sylvester McCoys, you run into that guy like that. The guy that plays Mortov and the other guy that plays Galron on Star Trek, they're Klingon chancellors. Both of those guys are super, super nice guys. The guy that plays the doctor on Voyager, the holographic doctor, another super, super nice guy. He does a lot of benefits for people with cancer and things. But like I said, over the years, I've only ran into maybe of the 50 or 60 people I've met, there may be like 2 or 3, maybe 4 that I didn't care for. The rest of them I thought were all really, really nice people.
All the celebrities I met have been at cryptid speakers and stuff like that. Bobo, Cliff, Jeff Meldrum, a bunch of the local researchers around Kentucky here and stuff. Last year, I didn't spend any time talking to her. They had one of the girls from Fact or Fake there. And I kind of felt bad for her afterwards because I wasn't the only one that didn't stop at her. She didn't have many people around her little booth. You'd look over there and she's just kind of twiddling her thumbs. Well, I like the show, but I mean, if I recall right, she didn't have any books or DVDs. She had like jewelry from different places she'd been in the world. I don't wear jewelry. So, I didn't even walk over there. Like I said, I kind of felt bad later because I realized as the con went on, it was a 2-day event. And just every time you looked over her, she was lucky if she had anybody around her table. I felt bad after I was like, well, she took the time to come there. And I listened to her presentation when she spoke. But I felt bad about it. And that was the only bad thing I noticed. If you wasn't one of the, David Pilates was there. But if you wasn't one of the big name, and the Mountain Monster guys was there. Now, of course, they had lines clear to the back of the building for all them guys. And then you had some lesser known people that have a few. Then there was 1 or 2 like her that just basically didn't have nobody. I know one of them was the lady She was like a grandchild. If you've ever heard of the Hopkinsville case here in Kentucky,
Oh yeah, yeah.
so it was one of her grandchildren or great grandchildren. And I mean, she sat there. She had a little book. I guess she self-published, and I bet 5 people didn't walk up to that table in 2 days. I felt bad for her, and that wasn't the people around her, the bigger star's fault. It was just the public. You could literally, it was like an exit ramp, and her table was right between like finding Bigfoot and mountain monsters. Well, all the traffic's coming right straight towards her, and all of a sudden it just to the side. Like I said, looking back, I felt bad, but like you said, most 9 out of 10 of those guys you meet are really good people. Linda Godfrey, I met her. There's been a handful of others I'm forgetting. Oh,
John
the 3.
Delancey,
What's that?
John Delancey, who played Q on
Mhm.
Star Trek: The Next Generation. He's another guy that's really down to earth and nice. I do a lot of cosplay at conventions, and he's the only celebrity that I've ever seen come into the green room before the costume competition and actually look at the costumes and wish people good luck. None of the other celebrities I've ever seen do that. He always does that. I've been to a couple of cons with him, and he always does that. And the first time I ever saw him, I was doing Doctor Who. I was doing the 4th Doctor with the big long scarf and the floppy hat. And there wasn't much of a line when I went down in the morning, and I went and got my autograph from him, and he wasn't really busy. So he stood there and talked to me for a while about Doctor Who. He was telling me about when he was in England and, he'd seen the stage play in England and several other things. And we talked for probably 10 minutes. So about 2 years later, I went to another convention in Canada, Ottawa Comic Con, and that's a huge convention. They have 30,000 people a day go through it. And of all the people that were there that day that I was there, I was the only one that was dressed like the 4th Doctor. There was a whole bunch of other doctors from the franchise, but I was the only the 4th Doctor. So the guy that was emceeing was dressed as the 11th Doctor, who at the time was the current Doctor. And he asked me if I would come up on stage with him at the beginning of the masquerade to help him introduce things. So I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. So he kind of wanted to do a past Doctor, modern Doctor kind of thing, banter back and forth. So I'm standing backstage where they had their green room right backstage at the con. And the celebrities were getting done their autograph sessions, and they were filing out through the back to their cars to go to their hotels or whatever. And John Delancey comes through. And he did the same thing I've seen him do at other cons. He came into the room and said, hey, everybody, you guys look great. Because I've been watching you walking up and down the con floor. He goes, I want to wish everybody good luck, break a leg tonight. So he turned around and started to walk away, and he got to me and he stops. And he turns around and he looks at me for a second. He goes, shore leave, Baltimore. And that's where I'd seen him and spent the time and talked to him. And that kind of made me feel good that, he took the time to remember me,
Oh, yeah.
And he remembered where he knew me from. It wasn't just like, oh, I know you from somewhere, don't I? It was like he took a second and thought about it and goes, oh, I know you from Baltimore at the Shore Leave Con. He was exactly right. So that kind of made me feel good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cliff and Bobo were like that from where they seen us at cons years past. And funny thing was, Mom went to the first con with me. She wasn't a believer. Just she got listening to different presentations, seeing the evidence. Well, now her and Bobo hit it off. They're buddies. So I can walk up and Mom be standing next to me. Bobo will lean around me and speak to Mom first. He's like, hey.
Bobo liked my
I'm
cat.
the one standing here with your T-shirt on, Bobo.
I tried to get a hold of Cliff. I wanted Cliff to look at my track. So I sent him pictures, and he never got back to me. But my picture was up there on the website, and a couple of people asked me questions where I found it and how big was it and all this kind of thing. I had one guy that was kind of a jerk, but it wasn't no big deal. He goes, oh, let me guess, it was the only one you found. And I was like, no, I found lots more than that, but this was the only one that was castable. And then he wrote back kind of
trouble explaining to people about the one I showed here recently.
Well, he said I think it was the same guy who made the comment. He goes, well, I wonder what Bobo would think of this track. And about 5 minutes later, Bobo comes on and says, well, I think Dean did a pretty good job getting that track. It looks good to me.
Yeah.
So that kind of made me feel good because that was my first time trying to make one. You know?
I got some plaster today. If that print's still as clear as it was in that picture, I'm gonna go back out there tomorrow if it's warm enough and try to cast it. I don't know if it'll be still castable or.
Well, like
And I sent the
this,
picture to one of the guys here in Kentucky that knows Cliff and Bobo as well. They said something about getting it to him, but I was like, well, if it ain't a cast, it ain't really worth looking at. Well,
Right.
not in them exact word. So, like I said, I might try to cast it if it's still as clear as it was the other day.
Mhm.
Well, we said we were quitting at 2 hours and we're closing in on 2.5.
Well, I had a nice time talking with you. I've
I
enjoyed
had
it.
a great time. It's been a great show. I appreciate it, man.
Oh, anytime you want me back, just
Sharing
yell.
everything you shared. Yeah. Well, I know 60 plus hours a week, you got to be tired. Probably got to get up early.
Oh yeah, I'm just thinking that myself. I'm cutting into my sleep time. I'm usually snoring by now.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking the whole time we was talking. I kept trying.
Yeah, I'm looking at a 12-hour day tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
We got rolling, and
yeah,
every time I thought would be a good point to quit, we get on something else.
yeah. Well, that just
I loved
shows
every
that
second of
it
it,
was
man.
good.
Yep. God bless you. Thank you.
You
I'll
too,
share
sir.
this on Facebook and send it to your group, my group, maybe
I
a couple
appreciate
of them.
that. Yes, please
Before I got permission.
post it on Seaway.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Have a good one, man. God bless.
You too, sir.